Long before they became known as the Space Wolves, before they even bore the name of Wolves of Fenris, the 6th Legion was forged in the crucible of Terra's unification wars. Created alongside their brother legions from geneseed, derived from the Emperor's own genetic mastery, the warriors of the 6th were marked from inception by a feral temperament and unmatched aggression that set them apart from their peers. The earliest battle records of the 6th Legion describe warriors of pale complexion and singular purpose, their geneseed implantation resulting in pronounced canine characteristics, elongated canines, heightened senses, and a predatory instinct that made them particularly effective shock troops. During the final stages of the Unification Wars, the 6th Legion earned a reputation for brutal efficiency. While the Thunder Warriors broke the back of enemy resistance, it was often the 6th that delivered the killing blow, hunting down and eradicating those who refused compliance. This early role as executioners was not merely happenstance but deliberate design. The Emperor had crafted them with a specific purpose in mind. Where diplomacy failed and standard military action proved insufficient, the 6th Legion was unleashed, a weapon of last resort whose very deployment signaled that all other options had been exhausted. The nascent Legion's first significant campaign beyond Terra came during the early expansion into the Sol system, where they participated in the pacification of the Martian territories that had rejected the Treaty of Olympus. Operating in small hunter-killer teams, they infiltrated the labyrinthine underground facilities of the Red Planet, eliminating resistance with a cold precision that belied their savage reputation. These early actions, while effective, were merely a prelude to the role they would later embrace under their Primarch. The fate of the 6th Legion, like that of all Astartes' legions, was irrevocably tied to their Primarch. During the mysterious scattering of the Primarchs, the infant who would become Leman Russ was cast through the warp to the death world of Fenris, a savage planet of ice, fire, and unforgiving wilderness where only the strongest survived. The exact details of Russ's arrival on Fenris remain shrouded in myth and legend, but what is known is that he was found as an infant by a pack of Fenrisian wolves, massive, intelligent predators that roamed the planet's frozen wastes. Raised among these apex predators, the young Primarch learned the ways of the hunt and the pack before eventually being discovered by a Fenrisian tribal king named Thengir. Recognizing something extraordinary in the wild youth, Thengir brought him into his hall, naming him Leman of the Russ. The transition from wolf to man was not without difficulty, but Leman's superhuman intellect allowed him to master human speech and customs with remarkable speed, though he retained the feral instincts and behaviors learned during his time with the wolves. Leman Russ quickly rose to prominence within Thengir's tribe. His strength, courage, and tactical acumen were unmatched, and he soon became the king's most valued warrior. When Thengir died, it was Russ who claimed leadership, not through inheritance but through demonstration of his superior abilities. Under his guidance, the tribe expanded its territory, conquering or absorbing neighboring clans and establishing dominance over a significant portion of Fenris's habitable regions. The legends of Russ's exploits during this time are numerous and often fantastical. Tales speak of him wrestling ice trolls with his bare hands, drinking entire meat halls under the table, and leading hunting parties against the most fearsome beasts of Fenris. Most notable among these stories is his confrontation with the great wolf Freki, a massive beast that had terrorized Fenrisian settlements for generations. Rather than slaying the creature, Russ is said to have beaten it into submission before adopting it as the first of his wolf companions, demonstrating the blend of ferocity and brotherhood that would later characterize his legion. The Emperor's arrival on Fenris came during the feast celebrating Russ's latest victory. Disguised as a wanderer, the Master of Mankind challenged the boastful Primarch to a series of contests designed to test not only his physical prowess, but his character. The first challenge was an eating contest, which the Emperor won handily. The second was a drinking contest, which again saw the Emperor emerge victorious while Russ fell into a drunken stupor. The final challenge was combat, and it was here that the Emperor revealed his true power, rendering Russ unconscious with a single blow. Upon awakening, Russ recognized the Emperor for who he truly was and swore fealty to him, accepting his place as a Primarch and commander of the 6th Legion. The transition was not immediate. Russ insisted on bringing his finest warriors with him, the first of many Fenrisian recruits who would transform the character of the Legion. These warriors underwent the grueling process of Astartes' transformation, their bodies reshaped by Russ's gene seed to become the first true space wolves. The reunion of Primarch and Legion marked the beginning of a profound transformation. The 6th Legion, once simply known as the Emperor's Executioners, began to adopt the culture, traditions, and even the appearance of their Primarch's adopted world. Fenrisian naming conventions, warrior traditions, and social structures were integrated into the Legion's hierarchy. Most significantly, the Legion embraced the concept of the Great Companies, semi-autonomous forces led by Russ's most trusted lieutenants, mirroring the tribal structure of Fenris. This cultural assimilation was not merely cosmetic, but fundamental to the Legion's identity. The warriors of the 6th began referring to themselves as the Vlka Fenryka, the Wolves of Fenris, in the native Fenrisian tongue. Their battle tactics evolved to incorporate the hunting strategies of the Fenrisian wolves, emphasizing pack coordination, pursuit, and overwhelming force at the point of attack. Even their physical appearance changed as the influence of Russ's gene seed took hold, with many developing wolf-like traits, Fang-like canines, enhanced senses, and in some cases, a covering of coarse body hair. The Great Crusade provided ample opportunity for the newly christened Space Wolves to demonstrate their effectiveness. Under Russ's leadership, they specialized in rapid compliance actions, deploying in strength to overwhelm resistance before moving on to the next target. Unlike some legions that emphasized occupation and integration, the Wolves of Fenris were a spear tip, striking deep and moving on, leaving the work of consolidation to others. One of their earliest significant actions came during the compliance of the Wheel of Fire, a cluster of star systems ruled by a confederation of xeno species that had enslaved human populations. The Space Wolves' assault was characteristically direct. They targeted the leadership nodes of the Confederation, deploying by drop pod directly into the alien command centers. Within 3 standard months, the primary worlds of the cluster had been brought to compliance, with the surviving Xenos fleeing into the void. The Space Wolves' role as executioners continued during the Great Crusade, though now with greater purpose and oversight. When the 2nd and 11th Legions were expunged from Imperial records for reasons still shrouded in secrecy, it is believed that the Space Wolves played a central role in their censure and possible destruction. These actions, while necessary in the Emperor's grand design, created tension between the Vlka Fenryka and their brother legions, particularly those like the Thousand Sons who viewed the wolves as little more than savage attack dogs. This reputation was not entirely undeserved. The Space Wolves embraced their role as the Emperor's executioners with grim determination. They understood that in the grand endeavor of uniting humanity, there would be instances where extreme measures were required, rebellions that needed to be crushed, examples that needed to be made. While other legions might balk at such tasks, the Wolves of Fenris accepted them as necessary, a burden they bore so that others would not have to sully their hands. The organization of the Legion into great companies allowed for significant operational flexibility during the Crusade. Each great company, led by a Jarl who answered directly to Russ, developed its own character and specialization while maintaining the core identity of the Legion. Bjorn's company became renowned for their expertise in void warfare, boarding actions that left enemy vessels as little more than floating tombs. Ogvi Helmschrott's warriors specialized in Arctic and subterranean operations, using the skills honed on Fenris to dominate environments that other legions found challenging. Central to the legion's structure was the Einherjar, Russ's personal guard of elite warriors drawn from across the great companies. These were not simply the best fighters, but those who embodied the ideals of the legion: loyalty, ferocity, and an uncompromising sense of justice. To be selected for the Einherjar was the highest honor a space wolf could achieve, a recognition that they stood as exemplars of what it meant to be Vlka Fenryka. The incorporation of Fenrisian traditions extended to the Legion's spiritual practices as well. While nominally adherent to the imperial truth, the Space Wolves maintained many of the shamanistic rituals of Fenris, particularly those related to battle preparation and the honoring of fallen warriors. The role of the rune priests emerged during this period, warriors with psychic abilities who interpreted these abilities not as manifestations of the warp, but as a connection to the primal spirit of Fenris itself. This distinction would later become a point of significant contention between the Space Wolves and legions like the Thousand Suns. As the Great Crusade progressed, the Space Wolves established their fortress monastery on Fenris, the Fang. Built into the tallest mountain on the planet, this massive complex served as both defensive stronghold and recruitment center. From here, aspirants from the tribes of Fenris were tested, selected, and transformed into Astartes through a process that incorporated both the standard implantation protocols and unique Fenrisian trials designed to test not just physical capability, but spiritual worthiness. The trials of initiation evolved to include the test of Morkai, a challenge that required aspirants to venture into the wilderness of Fenris armed with nothing but a knife, make their way back to the Fang, all while their bodies underwent the painful transformation triggered by the first stages of gene seed implantation. Many did not survive this ordeal, but those who did returned changed, having faced the beast within themselves and mastered it, ready to take their place among the Wolves of Fenris. The transition of the 6th Legion from Terra-born executioners to the Vlka Fenryka was complete with Leman Russ at their helm. Standing taller than even his transhuman sons, the Wolf King cut an imposing figure that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. His flowing mane of ruddy blonde hair framed features that blended noble bearing with feral intensity, while his piercing blue eyes seemed to evaluate all they surveyed as either prey or pack. When he spoke, his voice carried the harsh consonants of Fenrisian dialect, a guttural tongue that suited his blunt manner. Unlike many of his brother Primarchs who cultivated an aura of sophistication or strategic genius, Russ embraced his savage reputation. He dressed in furs and primitive armor, adorned with totems and runes, carrying weapons that appeared crude but were crafted with exceptional skill. The Primarch's constant companions were his 2 massive Fenrisian wolves, Freki and Jerry, beasts the size of small tanks whose intelligence exceeded that of normal animals, and who fought alongside their master with terrifying coordination. Russ's relationship with the Emperor was complex. While he maintained absolute loyalty to the master of mankind, there existed between them a tension born of their first meeting. Russ never forgot the humiliation of his defeat, and though he accepted the Emperor's authority without question, he did so with the proud defiance of a wolf that submits to the pack alpha while maintaining its own dignity. The Emperor, for his part, seemed to value this independence, recognizing in Russ a necessary counterbalance to other, more intellectually inclined Primarchs. With his brother Primarchs, Russ maintained varying degrees of camaraderie and animosity. He formed the strongest bonds with those who shared his direct approach to warfare, particularly Horus Lupercal of the Luna Wolves and Jagatai Khan of the White Scars. The Wolf King respected Horus's tactical acumen and charismatic leadership, while he and the Khan shared a love of speed, personal combat, and cultural traditions that set them apart from more codified legions. Other relationships proved more strained. Russ harbored particular contempt for Lion L. Johnson of the Dark Angels, a rivalry that erupted into violence during the infamous Dulan campaign. After successfully bringing the planet to compliance, the 2 Primarchs came to blows over a perceived slight to Russ's honor. Their duel lasted for days until Russ, suddenly seeing the absurdity of 2 sons of the Emperor trying to kill one another, began laughing. The Lion, misinterpreting this as mockery, knocked Russ unconscious with a punch. This incident sparked a bitter feud between the legions that would persist for millennia. Most notorious was Russ's antagonism toward Magnus the Red of the Thousand Suns. The Wolf King's distrust of psychers and warpcraft put him at odds with Magnus's entire philosophy. Where Magnus sought to understand and harness the powers of the Imperium, Russ saw only danger and corruption. This fundamental disagreement would later have catastrophic consequences during the burning of Prospero, but even during the Great Crusade, their interactions were marked by thinly veiled hostility and mutual incomprehension. The unique physiology of the Space Wolves stemmed from the Canis helix, a fundamental component of Leman Russ's gene seed that distinguished it from all other legions. This genetic modifier enhanced already transhuman abilities with traits derived from Fenrisian wolves, heightened senses that allowed them to track prey across vast distances, increased muscle density providing strength beyond even that of typical Astartes, and a preternatural awareness of their surroundings that made ambushing a space wolf nearly impossible. These benefits came with significant drawbacks. The canis helix was unstable, causing physical mutations that became more pronounced with age. Many space wolves developed elongated canines, yellow eyes with vertical pupils, and thickened body hair. Their metabolisms ran hotter than other Astartes, requiring greater food intake and creating a legendary appetite for meat and strong drink. Most significantly, the helix carried the risk of the curse of the wolfen, a degenerative condition where the marine lost control of the transformation, becoming a bestial creature more wolf than man. The implantation process for space wolf aspirants reflected these genetic peculiarities. After selection from Fenris's warrior tribes, neophytes received the canis helix first, triggering a violent transformation that many did not survive. Those who endured this initial trial were subjected to the test of Morkai, where they were abandoned in Fenris's wilderness to make their way back to the Fang. This journey forced them to confront the beast awakening within them, establishing the mental discipline needed to control their feral instincts. Successful aspirants then received the remaining gene-seed organs in a process overseen by the wolf priests, the legion's combination of apothecaries and chaplains. These specialists monitored not only the physical changes, but the spiritual development of the young wolves, ensuring they understood the traditions and values that define the Vlka Fenryka. The final step came with assignment to a great company, where the new blood claw would begin his service proper. The organizational structure of the Space Wolves diverged significantly from the Terran pattern followed by most other legions. Rather than the standard 10 companies with specialized roles, the Wolves organized themselves into 13 great companies, each functioning as a semi-autonomous force with its own distinct character. This structure mirrored the tribal organization of Fenris itself, with each great company maintaining its own heraldry, traditions, and preferred fighting methods. At the apex stood Leman Russ, bearing the formal title of Wolf King, though his sons often referred to him simply as the Old Wolf. Directly beneath him served his Wolf Guard, elite veterans drawn from across the Legion who acted as his personal bodyguard and carried his authority when acting independently. Unlike the formalized command structure of legions like the Ultramarines, advancement among the Wolf Guard came through deeds rather than rank, with Russ selecting warriors who had proven their worth through exceptional service. Each great company was led by a Jarl, a warrior of exceptional ability who answered directly to Russ. These commanders enjoyed considerable autonomy, allowed to pursue compliance actions and prosecute campaigns according to their own judgment, provided they adhered to the broader strategic objectives set by the Wolf King. This decentralized command structure proved highly effective during the scattered fronts of the Great Crusade, allowing the Space Wolves to maintain momentum across multiple theaters of operation. Within the great companies, warriors progressed through a hierarchy based on experience rather than specialization. All began as blood claws, impetuous young fighters barely in control of their new abilities and eager to prove themselves. Those who survived their initial engagements and learned to temper their aggression with tactical awareness advanced to Grey Hunters, the mainline tactical units that formed the backbone of the Legion. Veterans who displayed exceptional skill eventually joined the Long Fangs, whose centuries of experience made them ideal for heavy weapons support and strategic oversight. Outside this progression stood the specialized orders that served critical functions within the Legion. The Rune Priests channeled what they called the spirit of Fenris, psychic abilities that they insisted derived not from the warp, but from their connection to their homeworld. The Iron Priests maintained the Legion's wargear and vehicles, incorporating Fenrisian runic designs into standard Imperial technology. The Wolf Priests combined the roles of spiritual guide and medical expert, responsible for recruiting new warriors and preserving the Legion's traditions. Leman Russ's combat doctrine reflected his direct, aggressive nature. Where strategists like Guilliman or the Lion might employ elaborate maneuvers or feints, the Wolf King preferred overwhelming force applied precisely at the enemy's weakest point. He likened warfare to the hunt, with the Space Wolves as predators stalking their prey, studying its movements and habits before closing for the kill with irresistible violence. This philosophy manifested in the Legion's preference for close-quarters combat. Space Wolves trained extensively with chainswords, frost blades, and power axes, developing a distinctive fighting style that emphasized fluid movement and devastating counterattacks. Their armor often featured additional close combat weapons, combat knives, spiked gauntlets, and even sharpened pauldrons designed to turn the warrior's entire body into a weapon. The effectiveness of this approach was demonstrated during the compliance of Kernunos, a heavily forested world whose inhabitants had developed advanced camouflage technology that rendered conventional targeting systems useless. Where other legions might have resorted to scorched earth tactics, the Space Wolves deployed in small packs, using their enhanced senses to track the enemy through seemingly empty wilderness. The campaign concluded in less than a standard month, with minimal damage to the planet's valuable timber resources. For larger engagements, Russ developed the Spear Tip Formation, a concentrated thrust of elite units supported by heavy armor that aimed to decapitate enemy command structures in a single decisive blow. During the compliance of Dulan, this tactic allowed a force of just 3 great companies to overcome a planetary defense force numbering in the millions by eliminating their leadership and communications infrastructure within hours of planetfall. The Wolf King maintained a pragmatic approach to combined arms operations. While some Primarchs developed specialties in void warfare or siege craft, Russ ensured his legion maintained proficiency across all aspects of war. Space Wolf fleet elements were not the largest or most sophisticated in the Imperium, but they were perfectly adapted to their primary role, delivering warriors into combat as rapidly and directly as possible. Their vessels featured enlarged hangar bays for drop pods and assault craft, with reinforced prows designed for ramming actions that brought legionaries directly to grips with the enemy. Ground operations typically began with massive drop pod assaults, delivering entire great companies directly into the heart of enemy territory. This was followed by waves of Stormbirds and Thunderhawks carrying heavy support elements and vehicles. The Space Wolves favored the Leman Russ tank for its balance of firepower and reliability, often modifying the standard pattern with additional close support weapons and snow-adapted tracks. During the Neverlight campaign against a Xenos species known as the Crave, Russ demonstrated his tactical flexibility by adopting an uncharacteristically patient approach. The Crave possessed psychic abilities that allowed them to influence human minds, turning Imperial forces against each other. Rather than charging directly into this trap, the Wolf King deployed his forces in a series of rapid strikes against peripheral targets, drawing the aliens into prepared killing grounds where rune priests could neutralize their psychic advantages. Over 3 years of careful operations, the Crave were systematically isolated and eliminated without a single Space Wolf falling to their mental corruption. The Wheel of Fire campaign showcased the full might of the Space Wolves operating at Legion strength. An extensive region of space had fallen under the control of an Orkoid empire spanning dozens of systems. Rather than the grinding war of attrition favored by legions like the Imperial Fists, Russ employed what he called the culling of the pack, identifying and eliminating the largest and most powerful Orkoid leaders in rapid succession, creating confusion and infighting among the remaining greenskins. As the Orc Empire collapsed into civil war, Imperial army forces moved in to eliminate the fragmented resistance while the Space Wolves moved on to their next target. Throughout these campaigns, Russ maintained personal command from the front lines. Unlike Primarchs who directed operations from command centers or flagships, the Wolf King led by example, always at the point of greatest danger. He wielded Mjalnar, a massive frost blade forged by the Iron Priests using techniques that predated the Imperium, and Scornspitter, a bolt pistol modified to fire specialized ammunition developed specifically to penetrate the heaviest armor. In battle, he moved with a speed that belied his size, striking with precision that left even transhuman observers in awe. The Wolf King's battlefield presence served as both tactical advantage and morale booster. Space Wolves fought with redoubled fury when their Primarch joined them, striving to match his example and earn his recognition. Enemy forces often broke at the mere sight of Russ leading a charge, his massive form surrounded by his wolf guard and accompanied by his two lupin companions. Those who stood their ground rarely survived to regret their courage. The seeds of the tragedy that would unfold on Prospero were sown long before the first drop pod breached its atmosphere. Tensions between Leman Russ and Magnus, the Red, had simmered throughout the Great Crusade, their fundamental disagreement about the nature of psychic powers creating an unbridgeable divide. While Magnus embraced the warp as a tool to be mastered, Russ viewed it with instinctive suspicion, seeing only corruption in its otherworldly energies. These philosophical differences came to a head at the Council of Nicaea, a gathering convened by the emperor himself to address the growing concern over psychic powers within the legion's Astartes. The council took place in a massive amphitheater cut into the side of a mountain on the remote world of Nicaea. Representatives from all 18 legions attended, with several Primarchs present to argue their positions personally. Magnus the Red spoke passionately in defense of psychic practices, arguing that to restrict such powers was to deny humanity its destined evolution. His oratory was compelling, his logic seemingly flawless as he outlined how controlled psychic ability had benefited the Great Crusade. In contrast, Mortarion of the Death Guard and Leman Russ presented the case for severe restriction or outright ban, pointing to instances where warp corruption had led to disaster. Russ's testimony was particularly damning. He recounted campaigns where the Space Wolves had been called in to clean up catastrophes caused by uncontrolled psychic phenomena. The Wolf King described worlds left as smoking ruins, populations driven to madness, and Astartes corrupted beyond redemption by forces they thought they could control. His words carried the weight of experience, delivered with the blunt force typical of his character rather than the refined rhetoric of Magnus. The Emperor's judgment, when it came, was definitive. While he did not ban psychers outright, recognizing their utility to the Imperium, he ordered all legions to disband their librarious divisions and cease the development of psychic techniques. Magnus reluctantly bowed to this edict, though many who witnessed his acquiescence noted the barely concealed defiance in his manner. Russ, for his part, viewed the ruling with satisfaction tempered by suspicion. He doubted Magnus would truly abandon practices so central to his legion's identity and operation. This skepticism would later prove justified, though in ways more catastrophic than even the Wolf King could have anticipated. The true breaking point came when Magnus, through his continued psychic explorations, discovered Horus's fall to chaos and imminent rebellion. Using forbidden techniques, the Crimson King attempted to warn the Emperor psychically of this betrayal. This desperate act breached the Emperor's psychic wards around the Imperial Palace and shattered the delicate mechanisms of the Imperial Webway Project, a secret initiative that would have freed humanity from reliance on warp travel. The damage was catastrophic. The Emperor's carefully constructed portal into the Webway collapsed, allowing hordes of demons to pour into the tunnels beneath the palace. Only the Emperor's immediate intervention and the sacrifice of countless custodians prevented a full-scale demonic incursion on Terra itself. The Master of Mankind was forced to take his place upon the Golden Throne, using his immense psychic power to hold back the warp entities while repairs were attempted. The Emperor's rage at this catastrophe was cold and terrible. He summoned Leman Russ to his presence, ordering the Wolf King to bring Magnus to Terra to answer for his transgressions. The exact wording of this command would later become a matter of bitter contention, with some accounts suggesting the Emperor ordered Magnus's arrest, while others claimed he demanded the Crimson King's execution. What is certain is that Constantin Valdor, Captain General of the Custodian Guard, was present when the order was given and accompanied Russ on his mission to Prospero. Also present was Horus Lupercal, already turned to chaos but hiding his corruption. Seeing an opportunity to eliminate a loyal legion before his rebellion began in earnest, Horus allegedly reinforced the Emperor's command to Russ, emphasizing that Magnus was to be destroyed rather than captured. The Space Wolves Legion mobilized for war with grim efficiency. The fleet that assembled in orbit around Fenris comprised not only the majority of Space Wolf vessels, but also elements of the Custodian Guard and the Sisters of Silence, the Emperor's Null Maidens whose presence dampened psychic abilities. This formidable armada translated into the warp with a single purpose: to bring imperial justice to Prospero. Magnus, aware of their approach through his psychic abilities, made a decision that would doom his legion and world. Racked with guilt over the damage he had caused to the Emperor's work, he chose not to warn his people or prepare defenses. Instead, he psychically disabled Prospero's orbital defense grid and communication systems, ensuring the planet would be defenseless when the Space Wolves arrived. It was, in his mind, acceptance of deserved punishment. The Thousand Sons, unaware of their Primarch's decision, continued their daily routines in Tizca, their gleaming capital city. Tizca stood as a testament to the Thousand Sons' dedication to knowledge and enlightenment, a metropolis of crystal spires, grand libraries, and pyramidal structures housing centuries of collected wisdom. Its wide boulevards were lined with statues of great thinkers, and its plazas hosted scholarly debates rather than military drills. The Space Wolves' fleet emerged from the warp in high orbit over Prospero to find the planet's defenses silent. This unexpected development caused momentary hesitation in the Wolf King, who had anticipated a challenging siege against a legion renowned for its psychic might. The absence of resistance suggested either a trap or surrender, neither of which aligned with what Russ knew of his brother. After brief deliberation, Russ ordered the assault to proceed. The first wave comprised massive orbital bombardments that shattered Tizca's famous crystal towers and set its libraries ablaze. Manuscripts containing irreplaceable knowledge, collected from across the galaxy during the Great Crusade, were reduced to ash in moments. The bombardment continued for hours, methodically reducing the city's outer districts to rubble while inhabitants fled toward the center. Only when the devastation had reached the city's heart did Magnus finally act. Emerging from his meditation, the Crimson King beheld the destruction of his life's work and made a fateful decision. He ordered his legion to defend their home, ending his self-imposed penance and committing to battle against his brother Astartes. The Thousand Sons responded with disciplined fury. Despite being substantially outnumbered, they deployed in precise formations, using their psychic abilities to devastating effect. Telekinetic shields deflected orbital debris, while targeted telepathic assaults disrupted space wolf drop formations. For a brief moment, it seemed the defenders might repel the initial assault through sheer psychic dominance. This advantage was short-lived. The second wave of the Space Wolf assault included the Sisters of Silence, whose null aura created dead zones in the Thousand Sons' psychic network. As these blank-souled warriors advanced through Tizca's burning streets, the defenders found their greatest weapons neutralized, forcing them to rely on conventional tactics against an enemy that excelled in close-quarters combat. The Space Wolves attacked with methodical savagery. Great companies deployed in pack formations swept through the city, targeting the pyramids housing the Thousand Sons Fellowship lodges. Wolf priests chanted runes of warding as they advanced, providing some protection against psychic attacks, while Long Fangs established fire bases in captured structures, their heavy weapons providing covering fire for the advancing Grey Hunters and Blood Claws. Russ himself led the assault on the Pyramid of Fodup, Magnus's personal sanctum. Accompanied by his Wolf Guard and the Custodian contingent, the Wolf King carved a path through the Thousand Sons' defenders, his frost blade Mjalnar cleaving through power armor and psychic shields alike. Each step brought him closer to his confrontation with Magnus, a reckoning he had anticipated since the Council of Nicaea. Throughout the city, individual duels between champions of both legions played out amidst the wider destruction. Ahriman, chief librarian of the Thousand Sons, faced other Weidmake, a rune priest who had once shared knowledge with him during more peaceful times. Their battle was as much philosophical as physical, each warrior attempting to justify his understanding of the warp, even as they tried to kill one another. The slaughter continued for hours, with the Thousand Sons gradually pushed back toward the center of Tizca. Despite their valiant defense, they were outmatched in both numbers and close combat prowess. The presence of the Sisters of Silence proved decisive, their null fields creating gaps in the psychic coverage that the Space Wolves exploited with predatory instinct. As defeat became inevitable, some Thousand Sons officers made desperate choices. Cut off from their Primarch's guidance and facing annihilation, they turned to forbidden techniques they had secretly maintained despite the Nicaea Edict. Summoning entities from the warp, they temporarily gained advantages that allowed them to counter the Space Wolves' advance. These Pyrrhic victories came at terrible cost, with many warriors losing control of the very powers they sought to harness. The confrontation between Magnus and Russ, when it finally occurred, was cataclysmic. The two Primarchs met in the central plaza of Tizca, surrounded by the burning ruins of what had once been the most beautiful city in the Imperium. Magnus towered over his brother, his crimson form amplified by psychic energy, while Russ advanced with implacable determination, his armor stained with the blood of Thousand Sons warriors. Their exchange was brief and bitter. Magnus demanded to know why Russ had attacked with such ferocity rather than attempting to take him into custody. The Wolf King responded that Magnus's actions had proven him irredeemably corrupted, citing both the destruction of the Emperor's Webway project and the apparent demonic summonings occurring throughout the city. No reconciliation was possible between them, only judgment delivered at the edge of a blade. The duel that followed defied description by conventional standards. Magnus unleashed psychic assaults that would have annihilated lesser beings, warping reality around the Wolf King and attempting to crush him with telekinetic force. Russ weathered these attacks through a combination of his innate resilience and the psychic dampening effect of the nearby Sisters of Silence, closing distance with each step until he was within striking range. The physical combat was equally matched at first. Magnus wielded a copish blade of ancient design enhanced by his psychic power, while Russ fought with Mjalnar and his ornate bolt pistol Scornspitter. They exchanged blows that shattered marble and created shockwaves felt throughout the remains of Tizca. Neither Primarch gave ground willingly, each convinced of the righteousness of his cause. The turning point came when Magnus, distracted by the psychic death cries of his sons throughout the city, hesitated for a crucial moment. Russ seized the opportunity, driving Mjalnar through his brother's chest and lifting him bodily from the ground. Even impaled, Magnus gathered his remaining psychic energy for one final act, not an attack, but an escape. Tearing open a warp rift, he cast himself and his surviving sons into the Imperium, denying Russ the completion of his mission. The aftermath of the battle left Prospero a smoking ruin. The once beautiful world was declared perdita by Imperial authorities, its surface scoured of life and its location stricken from navigational charts. The surviving Thousand Sons, following their Primarch through the warp, eventually emerged in the Eye of Terror, where they established a new homeworld called the Planet of the Sorcerers. There, bitter and vengeful, they would fully embrace the very powers that had led to their downfall. For the Space Wolves, the burning of Prospero represented both victory and failure. They had executed the Emperor's judgment on a legion that had defied his edicts, yet Magnus himself had escaped. The cost had been substantial, nearly a fifth of the legion's strength lost to the Thousand Sons' psychic defenses and desperate counterattacks. More significantly, the action had created a blood feud that would persist for millennia, with the Thousand Sons swearing eternal vengeance against the destroyers of their home. The wider Imperium felt the repercussions of Prospero's fall in multiple ways. The destruction of the Thousand Sons' libraries represented an incalculable loss of knowledge, including information about the warp that might have proven valuable in the coming conflict with Horus. The elimination of a loyal legion, regardless of their transgressions, weakened the Emperor's forces on the eve of the greatest challenge they would face. The embers of Prospero still smoldered when the greatest betrayal in human history began to unfold. As the Space Wolves' fleet departed the ruined world, astropathic messages reached them bearing news that seemed impossible to comprehend. Horus Lupercal, favored son of the Emperor, had turned traitor. The War Master had orchestrated a massacre of loyalist forces at Istvan III before annihilating the first Imperial response at Istvan V, an event that would become known as the Drop Site Massacre. The timing was no coincidence. Horus had manipulated the conflict between the Space Wolves and Thousand Sons deliberately, ensuring that two powerful legions would be occupied and weakened while he made his first moves against the Imperium. The Wolf King's reaction to this news was one of cold fury. Russ had respected Horus above all his brothers, and the revelation of this betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Unlike many loyalist legions who immediately moved to confront the traitors or defend Terra, the Space Wolves' response to the heresy was measured and deliberate. Russ understood that rushing headlong into battle against Horus would play into the War Master's hands. Instead, he gathered his scattered great companies and withdrew to Fenris to assess the strategic situation and plan their next move. This period of deliberation earned the Space Wolves criticism from some quarters, with accusations of hesitation or even cowardice whispered by those who did not understand the Wolf King's methods. In truth, Russ was preparing his legion for a specific purpose, not merely to fight in the broader conflict, but to strike directly at its heart. He intended to kill Horus himself. The Primarch's reasoning was characteristically direct. If Horus could be eliminated, the rebellion would lose its focal point and likely collapse. The traitor Primarchs, for all their power, lacked the strategic vision and unifying presence that made the War Master so dangerous. It was a high-risk approach, but one that aligned with the Space Wolves' traditional role as the Emperor's executioners. While consolidating his forces, Russ dispatched small detachments of Space Wolves to various theaters across the Imperium. These units served dual purposes, gathering intelligence on traitor movements while providing crucial support to beleaguered loyalist forces. On dozens of worlds, the sudden appearance of a Space Wolf hunter pack turned the tide of battle or enabled successful evacuations of Imperial personnel. The most significant of these auxiliary actions occurred in the Trisolian system, where the Third Great Company under Jarl Gunnar Gunhild intercepted a word-bearer's fleet, attempting to secure a cache of ancient weapons. The battle that followed demonstrated the Space Wolves' tenacity in void warfare. Outnumbered 3-1, Gunhild employed unconventional tactics, using Fenris's harsh conditions as inspiration. His strike cruisers executed attack patterns that mimicked the hunting behaviors of Fenrisian wolf packs, isolating enemy vessels before overwhelming them with concentrated fire. The ground campaign on Trisolian Prime proved equally fierce. Word-bearers' chaplains had corrupted the local population, turning them into fanatical cultists who fought alongside traitor Astartes. The Space Wolves responded with calculated brutality, targeting the cult leadership while offering amnesty to civilians who surrendered. This approach, while bloodier in the short term, prevented the entire planet from being consumed by chaos. Gunhild's victory at Trisolian provided Russ with crucial intelligence about traitor fleet movements and confirmation that Horus was personally commanding operations from his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. With this information, the Wolf King finalized his plans for a decapitation strike against the War Master. The operation that followed would become known as the Spear of Russ, a direct assault aimed at killing Horus before he could reach Terra. The Wolf King gathered the majority of his legion, leaving only skeleton forces to defend Fenris, and set course to intercept the War Master's fleet as it pushed toward the Imperium's heart. What Russ did not realize was that his intention had been anticipated. Horus, enhanced by chaos powers, had foreseen the Wolf King's move and prepared accordingly. When the Space Wolves' fleet translated from the warp near the Alaxis Nebula, they found not just Horus's forces, but elements of the Alpha Legion waiting in ambush. The battle that ensued was a masterclass in void warfare from both sides. The Space Wolves fought with desperate valor, their ships forming defensive formations that maximized overlapping fields of fire, while their Primarch's flagship, the Hrafikal, attempted to break through to the Vengeful Spirit. Alpha Legion vessels emerged from the nebula's dust clouds at precise moments, striking at exposed flanks before disappearing again into the stellar debris. After 3 days of continuous combat, the Space Wolves' fleet was on the verge of destruction. Nearly a third of their vessels had been lost, and the remainder were suffering critical damage. It was at this moment that unexpected salvation arrived in the form of a Dark Angel's fleet led by Chapter Master Altaber. Though the Legion's Primarch, Lion Eljonson, was absent, his warriors honored the bonds of brotherhood by engaging the Alpha Legion forces, creating an opening for the Space Wolves to disengage. This rescue did little to ease the ancient rivalry between the two legions. Russ accepted the assistance with grudging gratitude, but the manner of their withdrawal was seen by some as another humiliation at the hands of the Dark Angels. The Wolf King's pride was wounded, yet his determination remained unshaken. He would find another way to reach Horus. The opportunity came months later when intelligence reports indicated the War Master, would be temporarily separated from the bulk of his forces while consolidating control over the Segmentum Obscurus. Russ gathered his most elite warriors, a force comprising his Wolf Guard, select veterans from each great company, and the Legion's finest rune priests. This smaller force could move faster and with greater stealth than the full Legion, potentially avoiding the detection networks that had doomed their previous attempt. The mission was fraught with danger from the outset. To reach Horus quickly, the Space Wolves would need to take direct warp routes through increasingly unstable regions. The Astronomican's light was flickering, as the Emperor devoted more of his psychic might to battling the encroaching chaos forces, making navigation treacherous. Rune priests worked constantly to maintain protective wards around their vessels, their powers strained to breaking point by the malevolent entities that clawed at the ship's gellar fields. When they finally emerged into real space, the Space Wolves found themselves in the Beta Garmin system, a vital strategic junction that Horus needed to secure before his final push to Terra. Intelligence had been correct. The War Master was personally overseeing operations, directing the traitor forces from the Vengeful Spirit in orbit around Beta Garmin 2. Russ divided his forces into 3 elements. The first, led by Bjorn the Fell-Handed, would create a diversion by attacking traitor supply lines. The second, under Rune Priest KVA, would neutralize the psychic defenses surrounding Horus. The Primarch himself would lead the third group, a strike force comprised entirely of Wolf Guard veterans, in a direct assault on the Vengeful Spirit. The operation began with precision. Bjorn's forces struck at a munitions depot on Beit Agarman's moon, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that drew significant traitor forces away from the War Master's flagship. Simultaneously, Kva's rune priests engaged the Thousand Suns sorcerers who had been providing psychic protection for Horus, their ritual workings creating temporary gaps in the War Master's supernatural defenses. Exploiting this opening, Russ and his Wolf Guard teleported directly onto the Vengeful Spirit. The boarding action that followed was among the bloodiest engagements of the heresy. The Wolf Guard faced not only traitor Astartes, but also demons that had been bound into service by the Sons of Horus. The corridors of the once proud flagship had been transformed into nightmarish landscapes where reality itself seemed to bend to the will of chaos. Fighting room by room, the Space Wolves carved a path toward the ship's command center, where their augur readings indicated Horus was located. Of the 50 Wolf Guard who had teleported aboard, fewer than 20 remained by the time they reached the antechamber to the War Master's sanctum. Here they faced the Juster and Terminators, the elite of the Sons of Horus, in a clash that would enter the legends of both legions. While his bodyguards held the entrance, Russ forced his way into Horus's private chambers. What followed was witnessed by none save the 2 Primarchs, but the outcome was clear. The Wolf King confronted his fallen brother, armed with a spear crafted by the Emperor himself, a weapon later known as the Spear of Russ. This artifact was designed to strip away the chaos energies that had corrupted Horus, potentially restoring him to his former self. For a brief moment, it seemed the weapon might succeed. When Russ drove it into Horus's chest, witnesses reported a psychic shockwave that rippled throughout the ship. The War Master's expression showed a flicker of recognition, a momentary return of the noble Primarch he had once been. But this clarity was fleeting. The Chaos Gods had invested too much of their power in their champion to relinquish him so easily. Horus shattered the spear and inflicted a wound upon Russ that nearly proved fatal. Only the intervention of the remaining Wolf Guard prevented the Wolf King's death. They recovered their Primarch's broken body and fought a desperate retreat back to their teleportation coordinates, losing more warriors with each step. The failed assassination attempt cost the Space Wolves dearly. Beyond the loss of irreplaceable veterans, the Legion's morale suffered a significant blow. Russ had confronted Horus at the peak of his powers and been defeated. The Wolf King's recovery took months, during which the traitor forces continued their advance toward Terra largely unopposed. By the time Russ returned to active leadership, the siege of Terra had already begun. The Space Wolves' fleet, still recovering from earlier battles, pushed their engines beyond safe limits in a desperate race to reach the Imperial Palace before the final confrontation. They arrived too late to participate in the siege itself, translating into the Sol system just as news spread of the Emperor's Pyrrhic victory over Horus and his internment on the Golden Throne. The Space Wolves' role in the immediate aftermath of the heresy was shaped by grief and determination. While other loyalist legions focused on rebuilding or securing their territories, Russ directed his warriors to hunt down fleeing traitor forces with relentless efficiency. Great companies spread throughout the Segmentum Solar, tracking bands of renegade Astartes who had escaped the collapse of Horus's rebellion. During this period, Leman Russ grew increasingly introspective. The death of the Emperor as he had known him and the grievous wounds of the Imperium weighed heavily on the Wolf King. When Robute Guilliman presented the Codex Astartes and his plan to divide the legions into smaller chapters, Russ initially resisted. He argued that fragmenting their forces would leave humanity vulnerable to future threats and betray the Emperor's original vision. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The Space Wolves would nominally accept the Codex organization while maintaining their unique cultural identity and recruitment practices. In practice, this meant the Legion transformed into a chapter that remained significantly larger than the 1,000-warrior standard, with great companies continuing to function as semi-autonomous forces united by loyalty to their Primarch rather than Codex doctrine. This reorganization was barely complete when Russ made his most fateful decision. Approximately a decade after the heresy's end, during a feast commemorating the victory over Horus, the Wolf King rose from his throne and announced he was leaving. He spoke of a vision, a path he had seen leading into the Eye of Terror where answers awaited. Despite the protests of his warriors, Russ departed with only his most trusted wolf guard, promising to return for the Wolf Time, the final battle of mankind. The impact of Russ's disappearance on the chapter was profound. Leadership fell to Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who struggled to maintain unity among the great companies while searching for any sign of their Primarch. Expeditions were launched into the Eye of Terror, each returning with fewer warriors and no concrete information about Russ's fate. After one such mission nearly ended in disaster, Bjorn forbade further search attempts, declaring that the chapter must preserve its strength until the Wolf King returned of his own accord. Decades passed, and as Bjorn aged, he made the decision to be interred in a dreadnought sarcophagus, becoming the first of the chapter's venerated ancient ones. From this mechanical body, he continued to guide the Space Wolves, his first-hand knowledge of Russ providing a direct link to their Primarch that no other chapter could claim of their gene sire. Rising from the frozen landscape of Fenris like a jagged tooth piercing the sky, the Eat stands as the most formidable fortress monastery in the Imperium. Known to outsiders as the Fang, this colossal structure was not built so much as grown from the highest mountain on Fenris, Asaheim. The ancient peak was hollowed out and reinforced over centuries, its natural strength enhanced by technologies dating back to the Dark Age of technology, creating a citadel that has never fallen to siege despite numerous attempts throughout its storied history. The scale of the Fang defies conventional description. Its lowest levels begin kilometers below the surface, delving deep into Fenris's crust, where geothermal energy is harnessed to power the fortress's systems. The mountain rises over 20,000 feet above sea level, with the uppermost chambers of the Fang extending beyond Fenris's breathable atmosphere. Between these extremes lie hundreds of interconnected chambers, training grounds, armories, feasting halls, and sacred spaces, where the traditions of the Space Wolves are preserved and passed down through generations. The outermost defenses begin long before an enemy reaches the mountain itself. Orbital defense platforms ring Fenris in high anchor, their massive weapon systems capable of crippling capital ships with single volleys. These platforms are complemented by surface-to-void missile silos concealed throughout the polar region, their locations known only to the chapter's iron priests who maintain them. The approaches to Asaheim are guarded by a network of outposts manned by chapter serfs and aspirants, each position designed to slow advancing forces and channel them into predetermined killing zones. The mountain's exterior is studded with weapons emplacements that cover every possible approach angle. Macro-cannon batteries capable of obliterating Titan-class war machines are nestled alongside more precise defense lasers that can target individual power armor joints at extreme ranges. Drop pod and aircraft hangars are concealed behind massive adamantium doors that blend seamlessly with the mountain's natural rock face when closed, allowing the Space Wolves to launch counterattacks from unexpected vectors. The primary entrance to the Fang is a massive gate known as the Valgard, large enough to admit super heavy tanks, yet defended so thoroughly that even this apparent weak point has never been successfully breached. The gate is preceded by the Helvid, a narrowing approach carved into the mountainside that forces attackers to advance in constricted formation under fire from hundreds of defensive positions. Beyond the Valgard lies the Hall of the Great Wolf, where the chapter master holds court and directs the Space Wolves' operations throughout the galaxy. Internal defenses are no less impressive. Each level of the Fang can be isolated and defended independently, with choke points designed to be held by as few as a single squad against vastly superior numbers. Environmental controls can flood entire sections with promethium that ignites at the press of a rune, or vent chambers to the lethal cold of Fenris's atmosphere. The fortress's internal layout is deliberately confusing to outsiders, with circular passages, false corridors, and hidden junctions that disorient invaders while providing defenders with countless ambush opportunities. Deep within the mountain lies the Vault of Sacris, where the chapter's most precious relics are stored. Here rest weapons and artifacts dating back to the Great Crusade, including items touched by Leman Russ himself. The vault is protected not only by physical barriers, but by runic wards maintained by the chapter's rune priests, creating a psychic barrier that has repelled even the most determined demonic intrusions. The highest chambers of the Fang house the Eyrie, where the chapter's fleet of Thunderhawks and other aircraft are maintained. These hangars open directly to Fenris's thin upper atmosphere, allowing rapid deployment of air support during ground engagements or evacuation of forces if needed. The Eyrie also serves as the primary landing zone for off-world visitors, ensuring that any diplomatic envoys must pass through multiple layers of security before reaching the chapter's inner sanctums. Perhaps most impressive is the fact that the Fang is largely self-sufficient. Hydroponic chambers produce food, recycling systems purify water and air, and geothermal taps provide inexhaustible power. The fortress could theoretically withstand years of complete isolation without external resupply, a feature that has proven vital during the rare occasions when Fenris itself has come under attack. The environment surrounding this mighty bastion is as deadly as it is beautiful. Fenris orbits its star in an extremely elliptical pattern, creating a planet of dramatic seasonal extremes. During its closest approach to the star, vast portions of Fenris's ice caps melt, raising global sea levels by hundreds of meters and transforming the landscape into a world of scattered archipelagos. As the planet moves toward the farthest point in its orbit, these waters refreeze, connecting islands into continents and locking ships where they once sailed freely. This cyclical transformation forces all life on Fenris to adapt or perish. The native fauna has evolved extreme survival strategies to endure these changes. Fenrisian wolves, the apex predators of the planet, grow thick winter coats that they shed during the brief summer, while developing fat reserves that can sustain them through months of scarcity. Sea serpents follow the coastlines as they advance and retreat, feasting on creatures trapped by the changing conditions. Even the vegetation displays remarkable resilience, with many species capable of surviving complete submersion or encasement in ice for months at a time. The most dangerous predators on Fenris include the legendary kraken, massive tentacled beasts that rise from the depths during seasonal melt to hunt along newly formed coastlines. Ice trolls inhabit the permanent glacial regions, their bodies adapted to temperatures that would kill unprotected humans in minutes. Most feared are the blackmane wolves, packs of which have been known to bring down armored vehicles when driven by hunger. These creatures are not merely dangerous, but cunning, displaying intelligence that borders on sapience when coordinating attacks. Beyond the natural hazards, Fenris's climate itself is a constant threat. Blizzards can develop in minutes, reducing visibility to zero and dropping temperatures to lethal levels. Geothermal instability creates sudden steam eruptions that can scald flesh from bone, while weakening ice shelves collapse without warning, dragging the unwary into frigid waters. The very air at higher altitudes contains insufficient oxygen for normal human respiration, making the approaches to the Fang deadly to the unprepared. It is from this brutal environment that the space wolves draw their recruits. The human population of Fenris exists in a state of constant struggle against their world, organized into tribal societies that migrate with the seasons. These tribes follow the retreating shorelines during freeze, then move to higher ground as the thaw approaches. Their entire culture is built around mobility and resilience, with each tribe maintaining massive longships that serve as both transportation and temporary shelter during migrations. Fenrisian tribal society is structured around strength and contribution to collective survival. Tribal leaders, known as jarls, earn their positions through demonstrated ability rather than inheritance. A jarl must be not only a capable warrior, but also a skilled hunter, navigator, and decision-maker, whose judgment determines whether the tribe survives the next seasonal change. Below the jarl are the thanes, veteran warriors who enforce the jarl's will and lead hunting parties or raids against rival tribes. Tribal mythology centers around the cycle of Fenris itself, personified as a great wolf that alternately sleeps and hunts, bringing winter and summer. Their creation myths speak of the All-Father who seeded Fenris with life as a test of worthiness, with only the strongest deserving to survive. The tribes view hardship not as misfortune, but as opportunity to prove their value, with each challenge overcome adding to their saga, the oral history that preserves their deeds for future generations. Warfare between tribes is common, but governed by strict codes of conduct. Resources are scarce on Fenris, making conflict inevitable, but the tribes understand that mutual annihilation serves no one. Most inter-tribal conflicts are resolved through ritual combat between champions, with the victorious tribe claiming disputed territory or resources, while the defeated are allowed to retreat without further bloodshed. Only when these codes are violated do the conflicts escalate to full tribal warfare. The relationship between these tribal societies and the space wolves is unique in the Imperium. Unlike most chapters who remain distant from their recruiting world's populations, the Vlka Fenryka maintain close ties with the tribes, observing their conflicts and identifying potential aspirants from among their most promising warriors. Space wolf recruiters, known as wolf priests, travel among the tribes during the Tournament of Champions, a gathering that occurs at the height of summer when the tribes can travel most freely. These tournaments serve multiple purposes. They provide a controlled environment for tribes to settle disputes, create opportunities for trade and information exchange, and most importantly, allow the wolf priests to evaluate potential recruits. Young warriors who distinguish themselves through courage, tactical thinking, and physical prowess may receive the rare honor of a wolf priest's attention. Those selected are taken to the Fang to begin the process of becoming sky warriors, as the Astartes are known in tribal dialect. This selection process is transparent and understood by the tribes, who view having one of their members chosen as the highest honor. Unlike many imperial worlds where the tithe of aspirants is seen as a burden, Fenrisian tribes actively prepare their young men for possible selection, incorporating tests of endurance and courage into their coming-of-age rituals. A tribe that produces an accepted aspirant gains significant prestige, often leading to advantageous alliances with other tribes. The space wolves reciprocate this relationship by providing protection and assistance during times of extreme hardship. When Fenris faces threats beyond the tribe's ability to handle, such as off-world raiders or particularly severe weather events, the chapter deploys forces to ensure the survival of the human population. During one notable incident, a massive volcanic eruption threatened to poison the atmosphere across an entire continent. Space Wolf Thunderhawks evacuated thousands of tribespeople to safety, while chapter vessels seeded cloud dispersal agents to minimize the spread of toxic ash. This protective relationship extends to defending Fenris from external imperial agencies. When the Ecclesiarchy attempted to establish missionary outposts on Fenris in the 32nd millennium, seeking to replace native beliefs with imperial creed worship, the Space Wolves firmly but diplomatically removed these missionaries. The chapter maintains that Fenrisian tribal culture produces the ideal aspirants for their unique gene seed, and any alteration to this culture could threaten their recruitment pool. The tribes view the Space Wolves with a mixture of awe and familial pride. In their mythology, the Astartes are the chosen of the All-Father, warriors elevated to fight in the eternal battle against the great enemy beyond the sky. When a blood claw returns to visit his former tribe, a rare but not unprecedented event, he is treated as a living legend, his words recorded by tribal skalds and added to the saga. These visits reinforce the connection between the chapter and its recruitment world, ensuring a steady flow of willing aspirants. The Space Wolves Fortress reflects this cultural integration. Throughout the Fang, tribal artifacts and symbols are displayed alongside imperial iconography. Drinking halls within the fortress are modeled after tribal great halls, with long tables where battle brothers feast and boast of their exploits in a manner recognizable to any Fenrisian tribesman. Even the chapter's internal organization into great companies mirrors the tribal structure of Fenris, with each company developing its own traditions and reputation while remaining part of the larger whole. The transformation process from tribal warrior to space marine incorporates Fenrisian traditions at every stage. Aspirants who survive the initial trials face the test of Morkai, where they are abandoned far from the Fang with minimal equipment and required to make their way back. This test mirrors tribal coming-of-age rituals, where young men must survive alone in the wilderness, proving their worthiness to be counted among the tribe's warriors. The most distinctive aspect of Space Wolf training is the integration of the Canis helix, the genetic modification derived from Leman Russ's own DNA that gives the chapter its canine characteristics. This process begins with the ritual of the helix, where aspirants drink from the cup of Wolfen, a concoction containing gene seed material that triggers the initial transformation. Many aspirants die during this phase, their bodies rejecting the modifications or transforming too completely into bestial Wolfen forms. Those who survive develop enhanced senses, increased muscle density, and elongated canines, traits that reflect both their Primarch's nature and the adaptive advantages of Fenris's apex predators. These physical changes are accompanied by psychological conditioning that emphasizes pack loyalty and instinctive coordination in combat, traits observed in the hunting patterns of Fenrisian wolves. The spiritual practices of the Space Wolves similarly blend imperial concepts with Fenrisian shamanic traditions. Where other chapters maintain chaplains who preach the imperial creed, the wolves have wolf priests who preserve the tribal sagas and interpret the will of the All-Father through runic divination. These spiritual leaders serve as combination chaplain and apothecary, responsible for both the physical and spiritual well-being of their battle brothers. Rune priests, the chapter's equivalent to librarians, represent an even more significant divergence from standard imperial practice. These psychic warriors do not acknowledge their powers as warp-based, instead claiming connection to the spirit of Fenris itself. They use runic talismans and totems as focusing devices, channeling their abilities through physical representations of Fenrisian mythological concepts. This approach allows them to maintain their powers while technically adhering to restrictions placed on psychic practices, though other imperial organizations occasionally question this distinction. The daily life within the Fang follows rhythms recognizable to any Fenrisian tribesman. Space Wolves organize their time around feasting, training, and hunting, with formal military drills taking secondary importance to practical combat exercises. Young bloodclaws learn through direct experience rather than theoretical instruction, accompanying veteran warriors on patrols of Fenris's surface, where they face the planet's natural hazards as part of their ongoing training. These training exercises often incorporate competition between packs, fostering the same spirit of rivalry seen between tribal hunting groups. Bloodclaws might be challenged to track and kill a blackmane wolf using only tribal weapons, or navigate across rapidly thawing ice fields before the path becomes impassable. Such exercises build not only combat skills, but the environmental awareness and adaptability that distinguish Space Wolves from more rigidly codified chapters. Human chapter serfs within the Fang are typically drawn from Fenrisian tribes, maintaining their cultural practices even as they serve the chapter in non-combat roles. These serfs handle the day-to-day operation of the fortress, from food preparation to equipment maintenance, allowing the Astartes to focus on warfare. Unlike the serfs of some chapters who are treated as little more than slaves, Fenrisian serfs enjoy respected positions, with their own hierarchies and traditions that parallel those of their Astartes masters. Deep within the genetic architecture of every space wolf lies a dangerous secret: the Canis helix, the primary gene seed modification that gives the Sons of Russ their enhanced senses and predatory instincts, carries within it a fatal flaw. This flaw manifests as the dreaded curse of the Wolfen, a degenerative condition that transforms an Astartes from a disciplined warrior into a feral beast, more wolf than man, driven by instinct rather than reason. The origins of this genetic instability can be traced back to Leman Russ himself. The Primarch's unique physiology, shaped by his early years among the Wolves of Fenris, contained elements that the Emperor's gene rights never fully stabilized. When this genetic material was used to create the gene seed for the 6th Legion, these instabilities were passed on, becoming more pronounced with each generation of implantation. What began as enhanced predatory instincts in the earliest space wolves gradually evolved into something far more dangerous. The first documented case of full Wolfen transformation occurred during the latter stages of the Great Crusade. A veteran sergeant named Torvald of the 11th Great Company began exhibiting unusual behavioral changes after sustaining wounds during compliance operations on Aldebaran III. His battle brothers noted increased aggression, sensitivity to light, and elongated canines beyond the norm for space wolves. Within weeks, Torvald had transformed completely, his body distorted into a hunched, lupin form covered in coarse fur, his mind reduced to animal instincts with only flashes of human consciousness. Rather than executing their afflicted brother as mutation was typically handled in other legions, the space wolves sequestered him in the depths of the Fang for study. Rune priests and wolf priests worked to understand the condition, recognizing it as an extreme manifestation of the same traits that gave their legion its distinctive character. They came to understand that the transformation was triggered by a combination of factors: combat stress, warp exposure, and the natural aging process of the gene seed within each Astartes. This knowledge led to the development of training regimens and spiritual practices designed to control the inner beast. Young aspirants were taught meditation techniques alongside combat skills, learning to channel their aggression rather than being consumed by it. Ritual consumption of Mjod, a potent alcoholic beverage infused with herbs gathered from Fenris's slopes, helped stabilize the more volatile aspects of their physiology. Most importantly, the pack structure of Space Wolf organization provided a social framework that kept the beast in check through bonds of brotherhood and shared purpose. Despite these precautions, the Wolfen transformation remained a constant threat. During periods of extreme stress or isolation, even veteran space wolves could succumb. The chapter developed protocols for dealing with such occurrences, with wolf priests monitoring battle brothers for early signs of degeneration and rune priests performing rituals to strengthen their spiritual resistance. Those who showed symptoms were temporarily removed from combat duties and placed under observation, sometimes being assigned to the Watch, a form of internal security detail within the Fang where they could be closely monitored. For those who fully succumbed to the curse, the chapter provided as much dignity as possible. Rather than execution, affected battle brothers were given a final opportunity for service through the trial of Mordecai. Led deep into Fenris's wilderness by wolf priests, they were released to live out their remaining days hunting the planet's deadliest predators. Many chose to end their lives in glorious combat against worthy opponents, seeking out ice trolls or great kraken to ensure their sagas ended with honor rather than degeneration. The most significant manifestation of the Wolfen curse came during the tumultuous days of the Horus Heresy. As loyalist and traitor forces clashed across the galaxy, the 13th Great Company under Jarl Jorun Bloodhowl received orders directly from Leman Russ to pursue a word-bearer's splinter fleet into the Eye of Terror. This mission, seemingly impossible given the corrupting nature of that warp storm, was accepted without hesitation by warriors who had sworn to hunt the enemies of mankind regardless of where they fled. The 13th Great Company entered the Eye of Terror in the early days of 31st Millennium. Vox communication with the main legion was lost almost immediately, and for thousands of years they were presumed destroyed, their sacrifice honored in the sagas but their fate unknown. In truth, they had embarked on what would become the longest continuous military campaign in Imperial history, a guerrilla war against the forces of chaos fought from within the very heart of enemy territory. Within the time-distorted realm of the Eye, the warriors of the 13th found their genetic curse becoming both liability and asset. Prolonged exposure to raw warp energies accelerated the Wolfen transformation, with entire packs succumbing to the change. Yet rather than losing themselves completely to bestial madness, they developed a unique state of equilibrium, physically transformed but mentally intact, their human consciousness coexisting with wolf instincts to create warriors of unprecedented ferocity who retained their loyalty to the Emperor. These Wolfen became the spearhead of the 13th's operations, striking at traitor forces with supernatural speed and savagery before melting away into the impossible landscapes of the Eye. They developed techniques to use the fluid nature of reality within the warp to their advantage, appearing seemingly from nowhere to tear apart chaos patrols before disappearing again. Traitor legions came to fear these apparitions, spreading stories of wolf spirits that hunted the damned in eternal punishment for their betrayal. The rest of the 13th adapted to support their transformed brothers. Wolf priests developed new treatments to slow the progression of the curse in those not yet fully changed, while rune priests learned to navigate the shifting currents of the Eye, using techniques that blended their traditional practices with knowledge gleaned from their new environment. They established hidden bases on demon worlds, striking at vulnerable supply lines and disrupting rituals that would have strengthened the chaos forces preparing to invade real space. For 10,000 years, the outside Imperium heard nothing from these warriors. Occasionally, Imperial Navy patrols near the Eye of Terror would report encounters with unknown vessels bearing Space Wolves iconography, or planetary governors on worlds bordering the Eye would describe defenses being bolstered by mysterious Astartes who disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. These reports were documented by the chapter, but treated as unconfirmed, the possibility of their lost brothers' survival too painful to embrace without concrete evidence. That evidence finally came during the 13th Black Crusade in the late 41st millennium. As Abaddon the Despoiler's forces poured from the Eye of Terror, Imperial defenders found themselves fighting alongside warriors who matched no known loyalist chapter. These fighters moved with unnatural speed, their bodies distorted into half-wolf forms, yet they fought with precision against chaos forces, displaying intimate knowledge of traitor tactics and weaknesses. Most tellingly, they bore the ancient heraldry of the 13th Great Company, though weathered by millennia of continuous warfare. The Space Wolves recognized their lost brothers immediately. Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane, commanding Space Wolf forces responding to the Black Crusade, made contact with these warriors and confirmed their identity through ancient recognition codes known only to the chapter. The 13th had survived, fighting an impossible war for 10 millennia, their bodies transformed but their oaths intact. Their return became known as the War of the Wolfen, as these changed warriors brought warning of a greater threat approaching from the depths of the Eye. The wider Imperium responded to the Wolfen with predictable suspicion. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus demanded the creatures be surrendered for examination, viewing them as warp-tainted abominations regardless of their apparent loyalty. The Space Wolves refused, forming protective cordons around their returned brothers and threatening violence against any who would separate them from their chapter. This standoff escalated until Logan Grimnar, Great Wolf of the chapter, personally intervened, vouching for the Wolfen's loyalty with his own honor and threatening to withdraw all Space Wolf forces from the defense against the Black Crusade if the Inquisition persisted. A compromise was eventually reached. The Wolfen would fight alongside regular Space Wolves forces, with rune priests and wolf priests monitoring them for any signs of corruption beyond their physical transformation. Those showing indications of mental degradation would be humanely dispatched by their own battle brothers, a fate the Wolfen themselves accepted as necessary. In return, the Inquisition agreed to classify the Wolfen as a sanctioned mutation rather than warp corruption, allowing the chapter to maintain its autonomy in handling the condition. The reintegration of the Wolfen into chapter operations was not without complications. Their fighting style had evolved during their time in the Eye, becoming more individualistic and predatory compared to the coordinated pack tactics of mainstream space wolves. They struggled with modern equipment, preferring simple weapons that required minimal maintenance over the complex systems developed during their absence. Most significantly, they brought with them combat doctrines developed against chaos forces that sometimes proved excessively brutal when applied to more conventional enemies. To address these issues, the chapter developed specialized units that paired Wolfen with regular space wolves. These tempering packs helped the returned warriors adjust to Imperial warfare while benefiting from their unique abilities and experience fighting chaos. Young Bloodclaws assigned to these packs gained invaluable insight into combating demonic entities, while the Wolfen relearned the importance of coordination and restraint in campaigns where civilian populations needed protection. Beyond the Return 13th, the Wolfen curse continues to affect the chapter in less dramatic but equally significant ways. Each generation of space wolves faces the same genetic time bomb, with the risk of transformation increasing as they age. This reality shapes everything from recruitment practices to battlefield tactics, creating a culture where warriors must constantly balance the predatory instincts that make them effective killers against the discipline required to remain human. The chapter's response to this challenge has evolved over millennia. Modern space wolves undergo regular psychological evaluation by wolf priests, who use a combination of traditional Fenrisian shamanic techniques and advanced imperial medical procedures to assess their mental state. Those showing early signs of degeneration are assigned to specialized packs where their condition can be monitored, while still allowing them to serve effectively. The chapter maintains facilities within the Fang where more advanced cases are studied, with rune priests working constantly to develop new methods of controlling the transformation. One such breakthrough came in the 38th millennium when Iron Priest Hrothgar Ironhelm developed a modified dreadnought chassis capable of housing a warrior in the early stages of Wolfen transformation. This Wolfen dreadnought used a combination of physical restraints and psycho-indoctrination systems to maintain the occupants' humanity while channeling their enhanced strength and aggression. Though only a handful of these specialized war machines exist, they have proven devastatingly effective in combat, particularly against demonic entities that conventional dreadnoughts struggle to engage. The Wolfen curse manifests differently across the chapter's great companies, reflecting the unique character of each group. Bjorn Stormwolf's warriors, known for their aggressive assault tactics, show a higher incidence of transformation, but have developed particularly effective meditation techniques to control their inner beasts. The Great Company of Eric Morkai specializes in tracking and eliminating those who succumb completely. Their warriors train specifically to hunt their own kind when necessary, a grim duty they accept as part of their service to the chapter. The most recent significant Wolfen incident occurred during the Fenris campaign, when a force of Thousand Suns under Chaos Sorcerer Ahriman attacked the Space Wolves' homeworld. The psychic energies unleashed during this conflict triggered mass transformations among defending forces, with hundreds of battle brothers succumbing to the curse simultaneously. The chapter was forced to divert significant resources to containing these suddenly transformed warriors while still defending against the external threat, a crisis that nearly resulted in the fall of the Fang itself. This event led to a comprehensive reevaluation of the chapter's approaches to managing the curse. Under Logan Grimnar's direction, the Wolf Priests implemented new screening procedures for aspirants, attempting to identify those with greater genetic resistance to the Wolfen transformation. Rune Priests strengthened the wards throughout the Fang, creating sanctuaries where affected brothers could weather periods of instability without full transformation. Most significantly, the chapter began incorporating controlled exposure to stressors that trigger the curse, building psychological resistance through carefully monitored combat simulations. Despite these advances, the fundamental reality remains unchanged. Every space wolf carries within him the potential to become Wolfen. This shared burden creates a unique brotherhood within the chapter, understanding that each warrior might someday need his brothers to either save him from his inner beast or grant him a clean death if salvation proves impossible. It is perhaps this awareness of their own genetic fragility that gives the Sons of Russ their characteristic combination of ferocity in battle and compassion toward human weakness, knowing better than most the thin line that separates man from monster. The Space Wolves stand apart from their fellow Astartes chapters through their steadfast refusal to adopt the Codex Astartes in its entirety. While Robute Guilliman's tactical treatise became the foundation for most space marine organization following the Horus Heresy, the Sons of Russ maintained their traditional structure built around the 13 great companies. This deliberate divergence from imperial standard reflects both their independent spirit and practical adaptation to their unique genetic heritage. Each great company functions as a semi-autonomous warband with its own distinct identity, heraldry, and combat specialization. Unlike the rigid 10-company structure prescribed by the Codex, the Space Wolves organization preserves the tribal character of Fenrisian culture. The 13th company holds particular significance. Traditionally composed of the most headstrong and ferocious warriors, it disappeared into the Eye of Terror during the Horus Heresy, only to re-emerge millennia later, bearing the full physical manifestation of the Wulfen curse, yet maintaining their loyalty to the Imperium. Leadership within each great company follows Fenrisian tradition rather than Codex hierarchy. A Wolf Lord, equivalent in rank to a captain but considerably more autonomous, commands each company with the authority of a tribal jarl. These commanders answer directly to the Great Wolf, the chapter master of the Space Wolves, but enjoy substantial tactical freedom. Wolf Lords earn their position through demonstrated battlefield prowess and leadership ability rather than seniority or formal promotion, with aspirants to the role often undertaking dangerous solo missions to prove their worthiness. The Great Wolf himself rules from the high seat in the Hall of the Great Wolf within the Fang. This position combines military leadership with cultural guardianship, as the Great Wolf must preserve Fenrisian traditions while adapting the chapter to face evolving threats. Logan Grimnar, who has held this position for over 700 years, exemplifies the blend of tactical genius and cultural understanding required, his unnaturally long tenure attributed to both his exceptional constitution and the will of Russ himself. Supporting the Wolf Lords are the specialized priesthoods that replace the standard Codex offices. Wolf priests combine the roles of chaplain and apothecary, serving as spiritual guides, medical officers, and recruiters. These warrior shamans travel among the tribes of Fenris, identifying potential aspirants and performing the initial implantation of the gene seed. Within the chapter, they monitor battle brothers for signs of the Wulfen curse, while preserving the oral traditions and sagas that form the Space Wolves' cultural backbone. Rune priests fulfill functions similar to librarians, but approach psychic powers through the lens of Fenrisian mysticism. They maintain that their abilities derive not from the warp, but from the spirit of Fenris itself, channeling energies through runic totems carved from rare materials found only on their homeworld. This distinction, while dismissed by imperial authorities as semantic, allows the Space Wolves to utilize psychic powers despite the restrictions established at the Council of Nicaea. Rune priests undergo additional trials beyond standard psychic testing, including exposure to the harsh elements of Fenris and communion with the world's primal spirits. Iron priests serve as the chapter's techmarines, maintaining its arsenal and vehicles. Their training on Mars is supplemented by distinctly Fenrisian techniques, resulting in technology that blends mechanicus orthodoxy with tribal aesthetics. Weapons and vehicles under their care often feature runic inscriptions and totemic decorations that other chapters might consider superstitious, but which Iron priests insist enhance performance. Their most distinctive creations are the chapter's dreadnoughts, which incorporate traditional Fenrisian elements like carved wolf heads and rune-etched sarcophagi. The progression of individual warriors through the ranks reflects the Space Wolves' emphasis on experience over specialization. All neophytes begin as blood claws, impetuous young fighters organized into packs of similar temperament. These units channel the natural aggression of newly implanted Astartes, typically deployed as shock troops or close combat specialists. Blood claw packs are often assigned a wolf guard to provide guidance and prevent their enthusiasm from becoming a liability, though veteran commanders sometimes deliberately give them free rein against suitable targets. Those blood claws who survive their initial battles and learn to temper aggression with tactical awareness advance to become Grey Hunters. These warriors form the tactical backbone of the chapter, equivalent to tactical marines in Codex chapters, but retaining a Fenrisian emphasis on close combat capability alongside ranged warfare proficiency. Grey Hunter packs typically carry a mix of weapons, with each warrior expected to adapt to changing battlefield conditions rather than fulfilling a narrowly defined role. Veterans who display exceptional skill and survive centuries of warfare eventually join the Long Fangs, heavy weapons specialists whose accumulated experience makes them ideal for fire support roles. Unlike Devastator Marines in Codex chapters, who are often younger warriors learning fire discipline, Long Fangs are among the oldest members of the chapter. Their advanced age, which would be a liability in assault roles, becomes an advantage in positions requiring patience and judgment. Long Fang packs operate with minimal oversight, their centuries of experience granting them tactical autonomy, rare among heavy weapons teams. Outside this standard progression exist specialized units that fulfill unique battlefield roles. Thunderwolf cavalry bond with the massive Fenrisian Thunderwolves, creating mounted units capable of devastating charge impacts and rapid redeployment. Wolf Scouts, unlike the reconnaissance specialists in Codex chapters, are veterans who prefer operating alone rather than in packs, their independent nature making them ideal for infiltration and assassination missions. The Wolfen, warriors who have succumbed to the curse but retain their loyalty, serve as shock troops whose preternatural speed and ferocity can break enemy lines where conventional tactics fail. The most prestigious position outside direct command is membership in the Wolf Guard, veterans selected for exceptional valor who serve as personal bodyguards to the Wolf Lords. Unlike veteran sergeants in Codex chapters, Wolf Guard are drawn from all ranks based on merit rather than seniority. A particularly valorous Bloodclaw might be elevated directly to the Wolf Guard, bypassing the standard progression entirely. These warriors receive the finest equipment available to the chapter and often lead smaller forces on specialized missions where their experience proves more valuable than formal rank. This organizational structure creates a fighting force that emphasizes adaptability over specialization. Space Wolf battle groups typically comprise elements from multiple ranks and specialties, combined according to mission requirements rather than following standardized deployment patterns. A strike force might include Bloodclaw assault specialists, Grey Hunter tactical elements, Long Fang fire support, and specialized units like Thunderwolf cavalry, all coordinated by Wolf Guard leaders and supported by the various priesthoods as needed. The Space Wolves combat doctrine reflects this flexible organization, where Codex chapters typically employ precise strike patterns and carefully coordinated maneuvers. The Sons of Russ favor a more intuitive approach that adapts to battlefield conditions. Their tactics draw inspiration from wolf pack hunting behaviors, emphasizing coordinated attacks from multiple vectors that isolate and overwhelm enemy forces section by section. Initial engagement typically begins with reconnaissance by Wolf Scouts or land speeder units, identifying enemy weaknesses and priority targets. This intelligence informs the deployment of main battle forces, with drop pods and Thunderhawk gunships delivering warriors directly to critical objectives. The Space Wolves prefer direct insertion over extended ground approaches, seeking to bring their superior close combat capabilities to bear as quickly as possible while denying enemies time to prepare defenses. Once engaged, Space Wolf forces demonstrate a characteristic fluidity of movement that confounds more rigid opponents. Units shift positions constantly, presenting no static target while maneuvering to exploit weaknesses. Bloodclaw packs serve as distraction elements, their aggressive charges drawing enemy attention and firepower, while more experienced elements move into optimal positions. Grey Hunters exploit these openings to secure objectives, while Long Fangs provide precision fire support that targets enemy heavy weapons or command units. This approach proves particularly effective against Xeno's forces that rely on predictable tactics. During the Loot and Reach campaign against Tau expansion forces, Space Wolf units consistently outmaneuvered the technically superior Tau by ignoring expected engagement patterns. Where the Tau anticipated conventional attack corridors, Space Wolf drop pods inserted directly into supposedly secure rear areas, disrupting command and control, while forward elements engaged fire teams that suddenly found themselves without coordination. Against more numerous opponents, the Space Wolves employ what they call the crushing jaw tactic, a battlefield-wide envelopment that gradually constricts, forcing enemies into increasingly confined spaces where their numerical advantage becomes a liability. This approach proved devastatingly effective during the suppression of the Hive Fleet Colossus splinter on Dynaxis 4, where seemingly scattered Space Wolf forces gradually herded tyrannid organisms into prepared killing grounds, where concentrated fire from multiple long Fang positions eliminated them with minimal friendly casualties. The chapter's preference for close combat shapes both their equipment loadout and unit training. Space Wolf warriors typically carry more melee weapons than their counterparts in other chapters, with even ranged specialists maintaining combat blades or power weapons for inevitable close encounters. The chapter's artificers craft distinctive frost blades, power weapons whose energy fields are modified to create a super-cooled edge that freezes flesh on contact before slicing through it, causing wounds that resist natural healing and regeneration. Their armor often features additional close combat implements, spiked pauldrons, bladed vambraces, and reinforced gauntlets designed to maximize damage in melee engagements. These modifications sometimes come at the cost of reduced mobility compared to standard Mark 7 or Mark 10 armor, but Space Wolf warriors consider this an acceptable trade-off given their combat doctrine. The most distinctive examples are the Terminator suits worn by elite Wolf Guard, which incorporate wolf skull helmets and decorative elements that would be considered impractical by more codex-adherent chapters. Vehicle deployment similarly reflects their combat preferences. The Space Wolves maintain larger numbers of assault transports like the Land Raider, Crusader, and Stormwolf, designed to deliver warriors directly into close combat, while fielding proportionally fewer artillery pieces than most chapters. Their dreadnoughts are typically configured for close support roles, equipped with close combat weapons and short-range armaments that complement their aggressive advance rather than providing standoff capability. This emphasis on close engagement does not indicate a lack of tactical sophistication. Space Wolf commanders demonstrate considerable strategic depth, particularly in their use of feigned retreats and false vulnerabilities to draw enemies into unfavorable positions. During the Munthrax campaign against Word-Bearer's forces, Wolf Lord Crom Dragongaze appeared to abandon a critical supply depot, withdrawing his forces in apparent disorder. When the Word-Bearers moved to secure the position, they triggered a carefully planned ambush as Space Wolf units emerged from concealed positions in the surrounding ice caves, trapping the traitors between multiple attack vectors with no viable retreat path. The effectiveness of Space Wolf combat doctrine varies significantly based on battlefield environment. They excel in Arctic conditions that mirror their homeworld, using their natural adaptation to cold and experience with ice terrain to outmaneuver enemies unused to such environments. During the Alaric Prime campaign, a single great company under Wolf Lord Sven Bloodhowl outperformed 3 full regiments of Astra Militarum in clearing Orc forces from the planet's polar regions, using the blizzard conditions as cover for approach, while the Orcs struggled with weapon seizures caused by extreme cold. Urban warfare similarly plays to their strengths, the complex terrain and multiple approach vectors allowing them to employ pack hunting tactics effectively. Space Wolf forces demonstrated this aptitude during the reclamation of Hive Tartarus, moving through maintenance tunnels and ventilation systems to bypass Orc barricades before emerging to attack from unexpected directions. Their enhanced senses proved particularly valuable in the smoke-filled lower levels, allowing them to track enemies through visual and olfactory cues that human forces would have missed entirely. The chapter faces greater challenges in open terrain where their close combat preference can leave them vulnerable to superior firepower. To compensate, Space Wolf commanders employ what they term the running hunter, approach, constant movement, combined with disciplined use of cover and smoke to close distance rapidly. Land speeder squadrons play a crucial role in these environments, using their speed and maneuverability to flank enemy positions and target anti-personnel weapons that could threaten advancing infantry. Space Wolf Void warfare similarly emphasizes close engagement over extended exchange of fire. Their fleet, while not among the largest maintained by first founding chapters, features vessels modified for boarding actions and close-range combat. Strike cruisers typically carry additional assault boats and boarding torpedoes, while their weapon systems favor short-range, high-impact armaments over long-range bombardment capabilities. When engaging enemy vessels, Space Wolf commanders seek to close distance rapidly, weathering initial volleys to bring their ships within boarding range, where their warriors' close combat prowess becomes decisive. The chapter's most distinctive naval asset is the Fist of Russ, a battle barge dating back to the Great Crusade that has been extensively modified over millennia of service. Its forward sections feature reinforced prow armor, designed specifically for ramming actions, while its launch bays can deploy the entire complement of a great company's drop pods simultaneously, allowing for overwhelming force concentration at the critical moment of planetary assault. The vessel's bridge incorporates elements of Fenrisian longhouses, with command stations arranged around a central hearth-like tactical display that reinforces the chapter's cultural identity, even in void operations. The name Logan Grimnar resounds through the halls of the Fang and across the battlefields of the Imperium with a weight few others can match. Standing taller than most space marines despite his age, the Great Wolf's imposing figure is made more distinctive by his flowing white beard and the ancient Terminator armor he refuses to replace despite numerous offers from the chapter's Iron Priests. The armor, adorned with totems and runic inscriptions accumulated over centuries of warfare, has become as much a symbol of his office as the legendary axe Morkai he wields in battle. Grimnar's rise to leadership began during the Nova Terra interregnum, when as a Wolf Lord he led successful campaigns against separatist forces that threatened Imperial unity. His tactical acumen drew attention from chapter command, but it was his unwavering sense of justice that truly distinguished him from his peers. Unlike many Imperial commanders who viewed human lives as expendable resources, Grimnar consistently demonstrated concern for civilian casualties and refused orders he considered dishonorable, regardless of their source. This principled stance reached its most visible expression during the First War for Armageddon in the year 444 of the 41st millennium, when Angron, demon Primarch of the World Eaters, led a massive chaos invasion of the vital hive world. Imperial defenders found themselves overwhelmed despite fierce resistance. The Space Wolves responded to the planet's distress call with unprecedented force, committing 11 of their 13 great companies to the conflict under Grimnar's direct command. The campaign that followed demonstrated Grimnar's mastery of combined arms warfare. Rather than engaging Angron's forces directly, the Great Wolf coordinated with Grey Knight's elements to isolate the demon Primarch from his supporting troops. Space Wolf drop pods inserted behind enemy lines to disrupt supply chains, while Thunderhawk gunships provided close air support for beleaguered Imperial Guard regiments. When Angron himself took the field, Grimnar personally led diversionary attacks that created openings for the Grey Knights to banish the Demon Prince back to the warp. Victory came at tremendous cost, with thousands of Space Wolves wounded or slain, and millions of Armageddon civilians exposed to the corrupting influence of chaos. It was the aftermath, however, that truly defined Grimnar's legacy. When the Inquisition implemented exterminatus protocols on Armageddon's population to contain knowledge of the demonic incursion, Grimnar refused to surrender civilians under Space Wolf protection. His forces engaged inquisitorial vessels attempting to board refugee ships, creating a schism that would become known as the Months of Shame. This conflict escalated until Grimnar personally slew Inquisitor Lord Gesme Cisneros, forcing a compromise that allowed survivors to live out their lives in closely monitored Imperial labor colonies, rather than facing summary execution. While criticized by Imperial authorities as insubordination, This action cemented Grimnar's reputation among the Space Wolves as a leader who honored the chapter's role as protectors of humanity rather than merely executioners. Throughout subsequent centuries, Grimnar has continued to balance political acumen with battlefield prowess. During the 13th Black Crusade, he coordinated Space Wolf forces across multiple fronts while personally leading assaults against key Chaos strongholds. His battle with the Chaos Lord Kosalax the Forsworn on the plains of Amethel became the subject of numerous chapter sagas, with witnesses describing how the Great Wolf's axe Morkai severed the traitor's Terminator armor like parchment before a frost blade. While Grimnar represents the chapter's present leadership, no figure embodies its living history more completely than Bjorn the Fell-Handed. The oldest dreadnought in Imperial service, Bjorn was among Leman Russ's most trusted lieutenants during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. After the Wolf King's disappearance, Bjorn served as the chapter's first Great Wolf before his mortal wounding during a raid on a Thousand Suns outpost in the early 32nd millennium. Rather than accepting death, Bjorn was interred in a specially crafted dreadnought sarcophagus, his critically damaged body sustained by ancient technology while his consciousness remains active. This existence, neither truly alive nor dead, has continued for over 10,000 years, making Bjorn the only living being who remembers the Emperor walking among humanity and the only space wolf who personally knew Leman Russ. Bjorn's physical appearance reflects his unique status. His dreadnought chassis, originally a standard Castroferum pattern, has been modified extensively over millennia of service. The original weapons have been replaced dozens of times, currently featuring a massive lightning claw and a plasma cannon of archaic design that Iron Priests maintain through increasingly complex rituals as replacement components become impossible to find. The sarcophagus itself bears thousands of runic inscriptions, each commemorating a battle or significant event from his impossibly long service. Unlike most dreadnoughts who suffer mental degradation over time, Bjorn's mind remains remarkably intact, though his perspective has grown increasingly detached from mortal concerns. He spends most of his existence in stasis sleep, awakened only for chapter crises or the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, when he recounts tales of the Primarch to new generations of space wolves. These awakening rituals have become increasingly elaborate as the chapter's rune priests seek to minimize the shock of returning to consciousness after decades or even centuries of dormancy. Bjorn's tactical value extends beyond symbolism. His first-hand experience fighting alongside Leman Russ provided insights into combat techniques otherwise lost to time, while his encounters with traitor Primarchs during the Heresy gave him unique knowledge of their weaknesses. During the battle for the Fenris system against Magnus the Red's forces, Bjorn's tactical guidance proved crucial in countering Thousand Suns sorcery, his memories of similar encounters during the burning of Prospero, allowing Space Wolf forces to anticipate and counter enemy strategies. Perhaps most significantly, Bjorn represents the chapter's direct connection to its Primarch. As the last living being to have seen Russ before his disappearance into the Eye of Terror, Bjorn carries the Wolf King's final instructions and the promise of his eventual return. This connection has proven invaluable during periods of chapter crisis, with Bjorn's authority transcending that of even the Great Wolf when matters concerning the chapter's fundamental purpose arise. While Grimnar and Bjorn represent the chapter's past and present, Ragnar Blackmane embodies its future. The youngest warrior ever elevated to the rank of Wolf Lord, Blackmane's meteoric rise through the chapter hierarchy began with his recruitment from the Thunderfist tribe, one of Fenris's most isolated clans known for their exceptional ferocity even by Fenrisian standards. From his earliest days as a Blood Claw, Blackmane displayed not merely courage, but an intuitive grasp of battlefield dynamics that veterans twice his age struggled to match. During the defense of Boreum Hive against Genestealer cultists, Blackmane's pack found themselves cut off from the main Space Wolf force when tunnel collapses separated them from their Wolf Guard leader. Rather than attempting to rejoin their battle brothers as protocol dictated, Blackmane led his pack deeper into cultist territory, correctly identifying the location of the Genestealer Patriarch through subtle environmental cues that more experienced warriors had overlooked. This combination of instinct and audacity characterized Blackman's early career, earning him both commendation and censure from chapter leadership. His elevation to Wolf Lord came after the Battle of Alaric Prime, where his unconventional deployment of Thunderwolf cavalry through supposedly impassable glacier fields allowed Space Wolf forces to outflank an orc horde that outnumbered them 20-1. The victory was decisive, but Blackman's willingness to disregard established tactical doctrine concerned more conservative elements within the chapter. These concerns intensified with Blackman's ongoing rivalry with the Chaos Sorcerer Maddox, a Thousand Suns champion who has repeatedly targeted Fenris and its people. Unlike the chapter's broader enmity with the Sons of Magnus, Blackman's conflict with Maddox has developed personal dimensions that some Wolf Lords consider dangerously close to obsession. Their confrontations have spanned dozens of worlds, with each encounter ending inconclusively as Maddox escapes through sorcerous means only to resurface elsewhere. The most recent chapter in this rivalry occurred on the shrine world of Raz Sheke, where Maddox sought to corrupt an ancient Imperial relic. Blackman's Great Company intercepted the Thousand Suns force moments before they completed a ritual that would have transformed the planet's population into chaos spawn. The ensuing battle devastated the planet's primary temple complex, with Blackman personally engaging Maddox, while his warriors contained the partially manifested warp entities summoned by the Sorcerer's Cabal. This conflict exemplifies both Blackman's greatest strength and potential weakness. His instinctive understanding of chaos tactics allows him to anticipate and counter threats that would overwhelm less intuitive commanders, but his personal vendetta against Maddox occasionally blinds him to broader strategic considerations. Chapter leadership monitors this rivalry closely, recognizing both its value in developing Blackman's potential and its risk should personal vengeance ever supersede duty to the chapter and Imperium. Beyond these three towering figures, the Space Wolves' history brims with heroes whose deeds have become legendary within the chapter and beyond. Ulrich the Slayer, current High Wolf Priest, earned his title during the Second War for Armageddon, where his solo defense of High Vulcanus's main generatorium against a World Eater's assault has become a textbook example of defensive close-quarters combat. Armed only with his Crozius Arcanum after his bolt pistol jammed, Ulrich held the critical choke point for 18 hours against waves of Khorne berserkers, his position marked by a growing pile of power-armored corpses that eventually formed a barricade of its own. More than his combat prowess, Ulrich's significance to the chapter lies in his role as mentor to generations of young space wolves. As High Wolf Priest, he personally oversees the most promising aspirants, shaping not merely their combat abilities, but their understanding of what it means to be a son of Russ. Both Ragnar Blackmane and Lucas the Trickster count Ulrich among their formative influences, though each interpreted his teachings differently. Where Blackmane embraced Ulrich's emphasis on decisive action, Lucas absorbed his subtle lessons about the importance of questioning authority when necessary. Enjal Stormcaller stands as the chapter's most powerful rune priest, his mastery of Fenrisian runic magic approaching that of the legendary rune priests who fought alongside Russ during the Great Crusade. Enjal's connection to the weather patterns of Fenris manifests in his ability to summon devastating tempests on the battlefield, his consciousness merging with storm fronts to direct lightning strikes with pinpoint accuracy, while hurricane-force winds disrupt enemy formations. This power comes at significant personal cost. Decades of channeling Fenris's elemental forces have physically transformed Enjal, his skin developing a bluish tinge, while frost forms continuously around his eyes and mouth regardless of ambient temperature. His armor incorporates specialized systems designed by the chapter's Iron Priests to regulate his body temperature, which fluctuates wildly during psychic manifestations. Most distinctive is his familiar, a cybernetically enhanced raven named Nightwing that serves as both companion and psychic focus, its augmetic components allowing it to survive the electromagnetic disturbances that accompany Enjal's powers. Arjak Rockfist, current champion of the chapter, represents a different aspect of space wolf heroism. Originally a blacksmith from the Iron Blood tribe, Arjak's physical strength was legendary even before his induction into the chapter. As a mortal, he reportedly carried an anvil up the slopes of Asaheim as penance for a failed forging, a journey that would have killed most Fenrisians. This raw power, combined with an unshakable sense of loyalty, made him an ideal candidate for the Space Wolves despite being older than typical aspirants. As a space marine, Arjak's signature weapon reflects his origins, the foe hammer, a massive thunder hammer that doubles as a throwing weapon, returning to his hand through integrated gravitic technology. In battle, Arjak serves as Logan Grimnar's personal champion, standing between the Great Wolf and any who would threaten him. During the Thousand Suns assault on the Fang, Arjak held a critical junction single-handedly against a Scarab Occult Terminator squad, his hammer creating shockwaves that disrupted their teleportation matrices and prevented them from outflanking the chapter's defensive positions. Among the many elements that distinguish the Space Wolves from other Astartes chapters, their weaponry and armor stand as tangible expressions of their unique martial culture. The Sons of Russ eschew standardization in favor of personalization, with each warrior's wargear reflecting individual accomplishments and pack affiliations. This approach extends beyond mere decoration to fundamental modifications that enhance their already formidable combat capabilities. Frost blades represent perhaps the most iconic weapons in the Space Wolves' arsenal. These master-crafted power weapons incorporate ancient Fenrisian forging techniques that predate Imperial contact, combined with power field technology to create edges of unparalleled sharpness. Unlike standard power weapons whose energy fields disrupt matter at a molecular level, frost blades generate a localized zone of extreme cold that crystallizes the target's structure moments before the physical edge strikes. This combination creates wounds that resist healing, as tissues shatter rather than simply separate when struck. The creation of a frost blade begins with ore mined from the deepest reaches of Asaheim, Fenris's single stable continent. This metal, exposed to the planet's extreme geothermal conditions for millennia, possesses unique crystalline properties that iron priests have failed to replicate with materials from other worlds. The ore undergoes repeated folding and tempering in forges fueled by volcanic vents, with each heating cycle accompanied by the application of runic inscriptions that iron priests insist enhance the metal's receptivity to power field harmonics. The resulting weapons take various forms according to the wielder's preference. Frost axes favor raw cleaving power, their broad heads capable of shearing through Terminator armor with single strokes. Frost swords balance cutting capacity with precision, favored by wolf lords who appreciate their versatility in varied combat situations. Most distinctive are frost claws, modified lightning claws whose energy fields create the characteristic frost effect, while allowing for the rapid strike sequences that blood claws particularly favor. Complementing these blades is the chapter's distinctive runic armor. While based on standard Adeptus Astartes power armor patterns, Space Wolf Battle Plate undergoes extensive modification by the chapter's iron priests. Most visible are the totemic decorations, wolf tails, fangs, and pelts incorporated into the armor's design not merely as ornaments, but as tangible connections to Fenris itself. These natural elements undergo alchemical treatments that render them as durable as ceramite while preserving their spiritual significance. Less obvious but more tactically significant are the runic inscriptions etched into the armor's surface and internal components. These runes, designed by rune priests and executed by iron priests, serve multiple functions beyond their spiritual significance. Protective runes create localized energy fields that deflect incoming attacks, particularly those with warp components. Enhancement runes strengthen specific armor sections according to the wearer's combat role, with assault specialists receiving reinforced greaves for landing impacts, while ranged combat experts benefit from stabilizing inscriptions on their pauldrons and gauntlets. The most powerful runic armor belongs to the chapter's Wolf Guard, whose Terminator suits incorporate protection layers developed over thousands of years. Each suit becomes increasingly personalized as it passes from one honored warrior to the next, accumulating totems and inscriptions that mark significant victories. The oldest examples, dating back to the Great Crusade, have developed a form of machine spirit more pronounced than typical Terminator armor, responding to their wearers with almost intuitive synchronization that compensates for the suit's inherent bulk. Beyond these chapter-wide patterns, individual great companies maintain signature equipment modifications that reflect their leaders' combat philosophies. Egil Iron Wolf's warriors favor heavily modified vehicles with reinforced ramming prows and additional close support weapons, mirroring their Wolf Lord's preference for mechanized assault tactics. Harald Deathwolf's company incorporates more organic elements into their wargear, with armor designed to accommodate the unique fighting styles required when coordinating with Thunderwolf mounts. The most sacred relics of the chapter transcend mere weaponry to embody connections to Leman Russ himself. Foremost among these is the armor of Russ, a complete set of artificer power armor worn by the Primarch during the latter stages of the Great Crusade. Unlike the crude furs and primitive plate he favored in his earlier years, this masterwork armor represented the pinnacle of imperial artifice, personally modified by the Emperor's own artisans to accommodate Russ's unique physiology and combat style. The armor's appearance combines technological sophistication with deliberate nods to Fenrisian aesthetic traditions. Its ceramite plates bear intricate runic patterns inlaid with precious metals, while the power pack features stylized wolf heads that vent excess energy through glowing eyes during periods of intense activity. The helmet incorporates an enhanced auto-senses suite disguised within a snarling wolf visage, allowing the wearer to track targets through blizzard conditions that would blind normal systems. Beyond its imposing appearance, the armor incorporates defensive systems far beyond standard Astartes equipment. Its power field can temporarily intensify to repel even direct strikes from anti-tank weapons, while internal compensation systems maintain the wearer's mobility regardless of external conditions. Most significantly, the armor includes psychic wards designed with the Emperor's own guidance, providing substantial protection against warp-based attacks that target the wearer's mind or soul. Since Russ's disappearance, the armor has been worn only during the most desperate circumstances, and never as a complete set. Individual components are sometimes granted to Wolf Lords undertaking missions of extraordinary importance, with the full assembly reserved for the defense of Fenris itself. The last recorded complete deployment occurred during Magnus the Red's assault on the Fang, when Great Wolf Logan Grimnar donned the full armor to confront the Demon Primarch in single combat, the protective wards allowing him to withstand psychic assaults that had incapacitated dozens of battle brothers. Equally significant is the Spear of Russ, also known as the Spear of the Emperor, a weapon with a particularly complex history. Originally crafted by the Emperor himself as a gift for his son, the spear combined physical perfection with psychic imprinting that allowed it to recognize and respond to its intended wielder. Its shaft, formed from an unknown metal with self-repairing properties, supported a blade capable of piercing any known material, while runic inscriptions along its length channeled the wielder's inherent psychic energy to enhance its already formidable capabilities. The spear's most remarkable feature was its ability to temporarily strip away chaos influence from those it wounded, a property Russ attempted to exploit during his confrontation with Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. This attempt failed when Horus, empowered by all four Chaos gods, managed to shatter the weapon, breaking both its physical form and many of its metaphysical properties. Russ recovered the fragments, which were eventually reforged by the combined efforts of the chapter's most skilled iron priests and rune priests, though never fully restoring its original capabilities. The reforged spear now resides in a stasis vault deep within the Fang, removed only for ceremonies commemorating Russ or when facing demonic enemies against whom its remaining anti-warp properties prove particularly effective. Unlike the armor of Russ, the spear has never been entrusted to anyone below the rank of Great Wolf, its partially compromised nature making it dangerous to those lacking the willpower to control its unstable energies. Beyond these major artifacts, the chapter preserves numerous smaller relics associated with their Primarch. The pelt of Beowulf, reportedly from the first great beast Russ slew upon arriving on Fenris, retains remarkable properties millennia after the creature's death. Warriors granted the honor of wearing it report heightened sensory awareness and resistance to environmental extremes, while enemies describe a psychological impact beyond normal intimidation when confronting its wearer. The pelt's fibers have been analyzed by both Iron Priests and visiting Mechanicus adepts, who found molecular structures unlike any known Fenrisian fauna, leading to speculation about possible warp influence on the creature's development. The teeth of the worm, a necklace of fangs from a sea serpent Russ reportedly killed with his bare hands, serves as a badge of office for the chapter's senior wolf priest. Each tooth contains microscopic gland remnants that continue to secrete tiny amounts of toxin, which wolf priests carefully extract and incorporate into the helix preparation given to aspirants. This toxin supposedly enhances compatibility with the canny's helix, though whether this represents actual biochemical interaction or merely psychological conditioning through ritual remains debated among the chapter's more scientifically minded members. Complementing these traditional relics are the chapter's distinctive war beasts. Fenrisian wolves, while superficially resembling their Terran namesakes, represent an entirely separate evolutionary path adapted to Fenris's extreme conditions. Standing as tall as a space marine at the shoulder, these creatures possess intelligence far beyond normal canids, with problem-solving abilities approaching those of primitive humans and pack coordination that military strategists have compared to squad-level tactics. The space wolves maintain packs of these creatures within the Fang, selectively breeding for traits that enhance their combat effectiveness. Wolf Scouts often work with individual wolves whose sensory capabilities complement their own, creating hunting pairs capable of tracking targets across thousands of kilometers in conditions that would defeat even Astartes' auto senses. During full deployments, released packs operate as autonomous units, instinctively targeting enemy flanks or isolated positions without requiring direct command. Even more formidable are the legendary Thunderwolves, a larger subspecies native to Fenris's most extreme northern territories. These massive creatures, standing twice the height of their smaller cousins with proportionally greater mass, can maintain sprint speeds comparable to light vehicles even through deep snow or broken terrain. Their jaws generate enough pressure to crush ceramite, while their thick hides demonstrate natural resistance to lasfire and shrapnel that rivals carapace armor. Thunderwolf cavalry represents one of the chapter's most distinctive battlefield formations. The bonding process between Astartes and Mount involves months of mutual testing, with both parties assessing the other's worthiness. Space wolves selected for this role typically demonstrate characteristics valued in Fenrisian culture: directness, physical prowess, and instinctive rather than analytical decision-making. The Thunderwolves, for their part, accept only riders who earn their respect through demonstrations of strength and will. Once bonded, rider and mount develop coordination that transcends training, with the wolf responding to subtle shifts in the Astartes' weight or scent changes that indicate adrenaline spikes. This connection allows for battlefield maneuvers impossible for conventional cavalry, such as the Fenrisian pounce, where wolves launch themselves from elevated positions to land directly on enemy heavy weapons teams, their riders engaging before targets can reorient their defenses. The equipment for Thunderwolf cavalry reflects their unique role. Riders wear modified power armor with reinforced leg plates designed to absorb the impact of the mount's movements, while their weapons favor one-handed operation to allow for control reins in combat situations. The wolves themselves often receive bionic enhancements from the chapter's Iron Priests, including reinforced skeletal structures, augmented muscle groups, and occasionally offensive bionics like adamantium fang overlays or implanted storm bolters controlled through neural links. Unifying all space wolf wargear is the chapter's distinctive runic tradition. Unlike the purely decorative inscriptions favored by some chapters, space wolf runes represent a complex system of psychic engineering developed over millennia by generations of rune priests. Each symbol channels specific energies when properly inscribed, with combinations creating effects that technological systems alone cannot achieve. The most common battlefield applications include runes of warding, inscribed on armor to deflect hostile psychic energies, and runes of striking, etched onto weapons to enhance their effectiveness against specific enemy types. More complex arrangements include runes of finding that assist in locating hidden foes, and runes of shielding that can temporarily project energy barriers against incoming fire. The most powerful combinations, known as rune staves, are maintained by senior rune priests who spend decades mastering their proper implementation and activation. The physical creation of these runes requires materials with specific properties. Traditional inscriptions use inks incorporating Fenrisian wolf blood, volcanic ash from Asaheim, and pulverized crystals from the planet's deepest ice caves. More permanent applications involve etching directly into weapon and armor surfaces, with the removed material replaced by molten metals containing trace elements harvested from meteorites that survive passage through Fenris's atmosphere. These meteorites, called star teeth in Fenrisian tribal dialect, are highly prized, with hunting parties specifically dispatched to recover them when orbital monitoring detects new impacts. The spiritual significance of space wolf equipment extends beyond combat effectiveness to core cultural values. Each weapon and armor component represents a tangible connection to the chapter's history and traditions, with the oldest examples passing from one generation to the next, along with the oral histories of their previous wielders' deeds. A frost blade might carry the legacy of dozens of battle brothers stretching back millennia, each adding their own sagas to the weapon's spiritual weight. This perspective transforms routine maintenance from mere technical necessity to ritual significance. When a space wolf cleans his bolter or repairs damage to his armor, he simultaneously honors the machine's spirit within the equipment and connects to the lineage of warriors who used these tools before him. The chapter's armories are consequently treated as sacred spaces, with appropriate reverence observed when entering or working within them. The totemic elements incorporated into Space Wolf Wargear further reflect this spiritual dimension. Wolf pelts worn over power armor create a symbolic bridge between the Astartes' human origins and transhuman present, acknowledging both their Fenrisian roots and their elevated status as the Emperor's chosen warriors. Bone talismans, typically crafted from the remains of particularly challenging kills, serve as physical reminders of victories that might otherwise fade from memory over centuries of service. The aftermath of the First War for Armageddon should have been a time of victory celebrations. Instead, it marked the beginning of one of the most bitter conflicts between the Space Wolves and the Imperium's own authorities. The months of shame, as this period came to be known, began when Inquisitor Lord Cisneros ordered the sterilization and internment of all civilian survivors who had witnessed the demonic incursion on Armageddon. The Inquisition, following standard protocol for chaos contamination, insisted that exposure to such knowledge represented an unacceptable corruption risk. Logan Grimnar saw things differently. The Great Wolf had witnessed firsthand the courage of Armageddon's population, who had fought alongside his warriors against impossible odds. To condemn millions to detention camps or death after such sacrifice violated everything the Space Wolves stood for as protectors of humanity. When inquisitorial ships attempted to board refugee vessels under Space Wolf protection, Grimnar ordered his forces to resist, beginning a military standoff unprecedented in Imperial history. The conflict escalated over several months, with Space Wolf vessels directly engaging Inquisition ships attempting to enforce quarantine measures. Grey Knights, initially deployed alongside the Space Wolves during the war itself, now found themselves reluctantly opposing their former allies. The situation reached its breaking point when Grimnar, invited to negotiations aboard the inquisitorial flagship, teleported directly into the command chamber and beheaded Cisneros with a single stroke of his axe Morkai. This shocking act of violence against an Inquisitor Lord should have triggered immediate retribution from Imperial authorities. Instead, it forced a reassessment of the situation. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, awakened to mediate the dispute, reminded all parties of the Space Wolves' ancient role as protectors of mankind. A compromise was eventually reached, allowing Armageddon survivors to live out their lives in closely monitored Imperial labor colonies rather than facing summary execution. While the Inquisition maintained the letter of its containment protocols, the Space Wolves had successfully defended the principle that humanity deserved protection even from its own institutions when they overreached. The cost of this moral victory was substantial. Relations between the Space Wolves and both the Inquisition and Grey Knights remained strained for centuries, with cooperation during subsequent crises hampered by lingering distrust. Within the chapter itself, the conflict reinforced their self-perception as outsiders within the Imperium, loyal to the Emperor's original vision rather than the bureaucracy that claimed to enact his will. This independent streak would be tested again during one of the chapter's most desperate hours, the Battle of the Fang. In the 32nd millennium, Magnus the Red, demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, launched a massive assault against Fenris itself. This attack was no mere revenge for Prospero, but a calculated attempt to eliminate the Space Wolves as a fighting force by striking at their homeworld, while the majority of their strength was deployed elsewhere. The timing was precisely calculated. Great Wolf Herc Ironhelm had led most of the chapter on a prolonged campaign against a suspected Thousand Suns stronghold, leaving the Fang defended primarily by aspirants, ancients, and support personnel. What Magnus could not have anticipated was the tenacity with which these remaining defenders would fight to protect their home. The first warning came when long-range auger arrays detected warp disturbances approaching the Fenris system. Jarl Gregor Haldane, acting commander in Ironhelm's absence, initially suspected a small raiding force and deployed a standard defensive screen. The reality proved far more threatening, a full-scale invasion fleet accompanied by demonic entities and sorcerous constructs that bypassed conventional defenses through targeted teleportation and warp portals. Magnus himself led the assault, his massive form visible from kilometers away as he strode across Asaheim toward the Fang. The demon Primarch's presence warped reality around him, creating localized warp storms that disrupted Vox communications and scrambled targeting systems. Conventional weapons proved largely ineffective against his psychically reinforced form, with defense laser strikes dissipating harmlessly against his protective wards. The initial defensive perimeter collapsed within hours as Thousand Suns Scarab occult terminators teleported directly into key defensive positions, slaughtering the skeleton crews before they could mount effective resistance. Dreadnoughts stationed in the Fang's upper levels engaged these intruders in desperate close-quarters fighting, sacrificing themselves to buy time for deeper defenses to be activated. Facing imminent defeat, Haldane made the fateful decision to awaken Bjorn the Fell-Handed. The Ancient One, roused from stasis sleep and briefed on the dire situation, immediately recognized the attack pattern from his experiences during the burning of Prospero. Under his direction, the defenders abandoned conventional defensive lines in favor of channeling the attackers through prepared ambush positions, where the Fang's architecture itself became a weapon. Particularly effective were the Wolf Scouts led by Håkon Gylfason, who utilized their intimate knowledge of the Fang's maintenance tunnels and ventilation systems to strike at Thousand Suns sorcerers from unexpected angles. These precision attacks disrupted ritual summonings that would have brought even more demonic entities into the fortress, forcing the attackers to commit more resources to protecting their psychers. The most desperate fighting occurred in the Vault of Sacris, where the chapter's most sacred relics were stored. Thousand Suns forces targeted this location specifically, seeking artifacts from the Great Crusade era that contained psychic imprints of Leman Russ himself. A hastily assembled honor guard of Wolfguard and Terminator armor made their stand at the vault entrance, their ancient tactical dreadnought armor allowing them to withstand sorcerous assaults that would have annihilated power-armored defenders. As the battle for the Fang reached its climax, the tide turned with the unexpected return of the main chapter fleet. Great Wolf Ironhelm, realizing he had been lured away by a feint, executed a dangerous forced march through the warp to return to Fenris. His arrival caught the Thousand Suns between the hammer of his fleet and the anvil of the Fang's remaining defenders, creating a chaotic three-dimensional battlefield as drop pods inserted fresh troops directly into the occupied sections of the fortress. The confrontation between Ironhelm and Magnus became the stuff of chapter legend. The Great Wolf, despite being vastly outmatched by the demon Primarch's power, engaged him in single combat to buy time for evacuation of the chapter's geneseed repositories. Witnesses described how Ironhelm's frost blade shattered against Magnus's staff, yet the Wolf Lord continued fighting with broken blade, and eventually his bare hands until the demon Primarch finally struck him down. This sacrifice was not in vain. The delay allowed Iron Priests to secure the most critical geneseed samples, while Rune Priests completed ritual wards that temporarily blocked Magnus's psychic abilities. Faced with the full might of the returning Space Wolves fleet and deprived of his sorceress advantages, the Crimson King withdrew his forces, having failed in his primary objective of destroying the chapter's future through elimination of their geneseed. The Battle of the Fang, while technically a victory, left deep scars on the chapter. Hundreds of irreplaceable artifacts were destroyed or stolen, dozens of venerable dreadnoughts were lost, and the fortress itself suffered damage that would take decades to fully repair. Most significantly, the attack demonstrated the chapter's vulnerability to coordinated strikes against their homeworld, leading to substantial revisions in their defensive protocols and fleet deployment patterns. The Space Wolves' conflicts with Greenskin forces represent another significant chapter in their martial history. Unlike their minimal involvement in the War of the Beast, where other chapters bore the brunt of the fighting, the Sons of Russ have repeatedly found themselves at the forefront of anti-Orc operations in the galactic north, particularly in the regions surrounding the Eye of Terror. The Mordrak campaign exemplifies their approach to Orc warfare, when WAGH. Grimtooth threatened the Mordrak system in the late 39th millennium. Imperial tacticians predicted a protracted conflict requiring multiple chapters and significant guard assets. Logan Grimnar proposed an alternative strategy, a decapitation strike targeting the warboss himself, rather than attempting to counter the Greenskins' numerical advantage directly. Three great companies deployed via rapid strike insertion, bypassing the main Orc forces to locate Grimtooth's command position. Space Wolf Thunderhawk gunships executed precision drops directly onto the massive scrap fortress, serving as the warboss's mobile headquarters. The assault caught the Orc leadership completely unprepared, with Blood Claws breaching the command center, while the Greenskin forces were still responding to the initial perimeter alarms. The subsequent battle demonstrated the Space Wolves' effectiveness in the chaotic close-quarters combat that Orcs typically dominate. Wolfguard Terminators absorbed charges from Orc knobs that would have shattered other Astartes units, while Long Fangs established fire bases covering potential reinforcement routes. At the center of the fighting, Grimnar himself engaged Grimtooth in single combat. The clash between Morkai and the warboss's power clawed, generating impact shockwaves that stunned nearby combatants. Grimnar's victory came at the perfect psychological moment, just as the main Orc force began to realize their headquarters was under attack. The sight of their warboss's severed head held aloft by the blood-drenched Great Wolf triggered the latent instability in the Orc social structure. Sub-bosses immediately began fighting for dominance, turning what should have been a coordinated counterattack into a multi-sided power struggle that allowed the Space Wolves to extract with minimal casualties. The WAGH collapsed within weeks as infighting consumed the Greenskin forces. Imperial Guard regiments moved in to eliminate the fragmented bands, while the Space Wolves had already departed for their next deployment. This pattern of targeted decapitation strikes became a hallmark of Space Wolf anti-Orc operations, with chapter records documenting over 200 successful warboss eliminations over the millennia. The arrival of Primaris Space Marines following the resurrection of Robute Guilliman presented the chapter with an unprecedented challenge to their traditions and identity. Unlike other first founding chapters who received these new warriors with varying degrees of enthusiasm, the Space Wolves initially viewed them with deep suspicion, seeing them as potential dilution of their genetic legacy and cultural distinctiveness. The first Primaris contingent, led by Wolf Lord Haldor Icebelt, arrived on Fenris during a period of crisis. The psychic awakening was causing increased instances of the Wolfen curse throughout the chapter, while recent conflicts had left their fighting strength significantly depleted. Despite this desperate need for reinforcement, many within the chapter questioned whether these newcomers, created through Belisarius Call's modifications rather than traditional Fenrisian trials, could truly be considered sons of Russ. Grimnar, displaying the pragmatism that had defined his long leadership, decreed that the Primaris wolves would be accepted, but must prove themselves according to chapter traditions. Each warrior, regardless of rank or battlefield experience elsewhere, would undergo modified versions of Fenrisian trials, including exposure to the Canis helix through ritual consumption of the Cup of Wulfen. Many questioned whether the already enhanced Primaris physiology would reject this secondary modification, potentially wasting precious gene seed resources. The results surprised everyone involved. Not only did the Primaris bodies accept the Canis helix, but they demonstrated improved stability compared to traditional space wolves, with reduced incidence of the Wulfen curse while still developing the characteristic fangs, enhanced senses, and other lupin traits. Iron priests and wolf priests spent months studying these outcomes, eventually theorizing that Call's work had inadvertently addressed some of the genetic instabilities in Russ's gene line. Cultural integration proved more challenging than physiological. The Primaris wolves, created and indoctrinated far from Fenris, lacked the intuitive understanding of pack dynamics and tribal traditions that define the chapter's operations. Their combat doctrine, based on Guilliman's tactical precepts, emphasized precision and efficiency over the controlled aggression favored by traditional space wolves. Wolflord Icebelt recognized this disconnect and implemented an immersion program pairing Primaris wolves with veteran battle brothers in mixed packs. These formations initially struggled with coordination as different combat philosophies clashed, but gradually developed hybrid approaches that combined Primaris tactical discipline with traditional space wolf ferocity. The most successful integration occurred among the infiltrators and incursors, whose operational style naturally aligned with wolf scout techniques. The true acceptance of Primaris wolves came during the invasion of the Fenris system by forces of the Thousand Sons. Fighting alongside their traditional brothers against the chapter's ancient enemy, the Primaris contingent demonstrated both tactical flexibility and the spiritual fortitude to resist Magnus's psychic assaults. When Primaris Lieutenant Gaius Hrodvitnir interposed himself between a Thousand Sons sorcerer and a wounded Logan Grimnar, absorbing a lethal psychic blast meant for the Great Wolf, the last significant resistance to their inclusion faded. In the years since, Primaris wolves have been fully incorporated into all levels of chapter organization. While they maintain some distinct units leveraging their unique capabilities, they primarily serve integrated into the traditional Great Company structure. The initial concerns about genetic purity have largely been replaced by appreciation for the enhanced resilience they bring to the chapter's gene line, potentially offering a long-term solution to the Wulfen curse that has plagued the Sons of Russ since their founding. This integration has not been without compromise on both sides. Traditional space wolves have adopted elements of Primaris tactical doctrine, particularly in ranged combat operations, where the enhanced accuracy of Primaris bolt weapons provides significant advantages. In return, Primaris wolves have embraced Fenrisian cultural practices, growing out their hair in traditional patterns, adopting tribal naming conventions, and participating in the saga-telling rituals that preserve the chapter's oral history. The most visible symbol of this successful merger can be seen in the chapter's deployment patterns during the Indomitus Crusade. Space Wolf contingents typically featured mixed compositions, with Primaris Hellblasters providing precision fire support for traditional Bloodclaw assault units, while aggressor squads anchored defensive positions that allowed Wolfguard Strike forces greater operational flexibility. This integration has created a fighting force that honors the chapter's ancient traditions while embracing the new capabilities necessary to confront the unprecedented threats facing the Imperium in the era of the Great Rift. The opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum tore reality asunder, splitting the galaxy with a wound of raw warp space that stretched from the Eye of Terror to the Hadex anomaly. As the skies above thousands of worlds burned with unnatural light, the space wolves found themselves in a precarious position. Fenris, their ancient homeworld, lay in the galactic north, dangerously close to the expanding borders of what Imperial cartographers now called the Great Rift. Logan Grimnar, watching from the Fang's uppermost observatory as new constellations of horror formed in Fenris's night sky, immediately grasped the strategic implications. The Imperium had been cut in half, with nearly all of the Space Wolves' traditional defense territories falling within what was now being called Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium. Countless worlds that had relied on the Sons of Russ for protection were now isolated, facing demonic incursions without hope of reinforcement. "The All-Father tests us as never before," Grimnar reportedly told his assembled wolf lords. "The time of the wolf is upon us." The Great Wolf's first action was to secure Fenris itself. With warp travel becoming increasingly treacherous, the chapter's scattered great companies needed a stable base from which to operate. Iron Priests worked alongside Rune Priests to strengthen the Fang's ancient void shields and psychic wards, incorporating techniques developed during Magnus's previous assaults to create overlapping layers of protection against both physical and warp-based threats. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, awakened to provide counsel during this unprecedented crisis, offered perspective that only a warrior who had lived through the Horus Heresy could provide. The Ancient One recognized patterns in the spreading chaos that echoed the darkest days of Old Night, when humanity faced extinction at the hands of warp entities. His recommendation was clear: the Space Wolves must prioritize the protection of human populations over military objectives or territorial control. This guidance shaped the chapter's initial response to the Great Rift. Rather than attempting to maintain control over vast regions as they had traditionally done, the Space Wolves adopted what they called the Shattered Pack strategy. Great companies operated independently, establishing temporary bases on key worlds from which they launched rapid response operations to nearby systems experiencing demonic incursions or chaos raids. Wolflord Crom Dragongaze's Great Company exemplified this approach during the Black Frost Offensive. Based from the fortress world of Calidus Prime, his warriors conducted over 70 distinct operations across 12 systems in a 6-month period. Each strike followed the same pattern: rapid insertion via drop pod or Thunderhawk, elimination of immediate threats to civilian populations, establishment of defensible perimeters around population centers, and training of local militia before withdrawing to address the next crisis. This operational tempo took a severe toll on even transhuman physiology. Combat records from this period show individual battle brothers fighting continuously for weeks without rest, consuming stimulants and battlefield nutrients to maintain combat effectiveness. Wolf priests struggled to keep pace with mounting casualties, performing emergency field surgeries between deployments and prioritizing treatments that would return warriors to battle readiness over complete healing. The strain was psychological as well as physical. Space Wolves have always operated with a clear understanding of their purpose: to protect humanity from its enemies. The new reality of the Dark Imperium forced them to make impossible choices about which populations could be saved and which must be abandoned to their fate. These decisions weighed heavily on Wolf Lords accustomed to leaving no pack member behind, much less entire human settlements. Grimnar recognized that this operational pattern was unsustainable. Without the infrastructure of a unified Imperium to provide reinforcement, resupply, and intelligence, even the mighty Sons of Russ would eventually be ground down by attrition. The chapter needed allies and resources if it was to continue functioning effectively in the new reality of the Dark Imperium. The arrival of the Indomitus Crusade in the Fenris system marked a turning point. Robute Guilliman, the resurrected Primarch of the Ultramarines, brought not only military reinforcement, but something the Space Wolves had never expected to see: new battle brothers created through technologies unknown since the Emperor walked among humanity. The Primaris Space Marines represented both opportunity and challenge for the Sons of Russ. Their enhanced capabilities offered the possibility of reinforcing a chapter depleted by constant warfare, but their creation outside traditional Fenrisian trials raised serious questions about compatibility with the unique culture and gene seed of the Space Wolves. Grimnar's initial meeting with Guilliman was tense. The Great Wolf had never known the Ultramarines Primarch personally, having ascended to leadership long after Guilliman's internment in stasis. Historical records suggested Leman Russ and Guilliman had maintained a relationship of mutual respect despite their drastically different approaches to warfare and governance. But whether this ancient brotherhood would translate to their sons remained uncertain. To his credit, Leman approached the Space Wolves with diplomatic sensitivity rare among imperial authorities. Rather than demanding compliance with his new Codex Imperialis, as he had during the Second Founding, the Primarch acknowledged the Sons of Russ's unique traditions and the effectiveness of their existing organizational structure. His offer of Primaris reinforcement came without strings attached. The Space Wolves would remain free to incorporate these new warriors according to their own traditions. This respectful approach, combined with the chapter's desperate need for reinforcement, led Grimnar to accept the Primaris Marines into the ranks of the Space Wolves. The integration process began immediately, with wolf priests subjecting the new arrivals to modified versions of traditional trials to assess their worthiness to join the chapter. The results were mixed. Physically, the Primaris proved remarkably compatible with Space Wolf gene seed modifications, including the crucial Canis helix. Their enhanced physiology actually demonstrated improved stability, with lower rates of mutation and degeneration than traditional aspirants. This discovery led to cautious optimism that the Primaris strain might eventually offer a solution to the Wolfen curse that had plagued the chapter since its founding. Culturally, however, integration proved more challenging. The first generation of Primaris Space Wolves had been created from Terran stock, lacking the ingrained cultural context of Fenrisian tribal society. Their combat doctrine, based on Leman's tactical precepts, emphasized disciplined fire patterns and coordinated maneuvers over the individualistic ferocity traditional Space Wolves favored. Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane, among the youngest of the chapter's commanders, took the lead in addressing these cultural disconnects. Recognizing parallels to his own experience as a tribal warrior adapting to Astartes' transformation, Blackmane developed an immersion program pairing Primaris Marines with traditional Space Wolves in mixed hunting parties on Fenris itself. These expeditions forced both groups to rely on each other's strengths while navigating the deadly terrain of their homeworld. The most successful integration occurred when Primaris Wolves participated in their first Fenrisian winter. As the planet's elliptical orbit took it farther from its sun, temperatures plummeted to levels that would kill unprotected humans in minutes. Primaris and traditional Space Wolves fought side by side against the monstrous predators that emerged during this season, forging bonds through shared combat that transcended their physiological differences. By the time the Indomitus Crusade moved on from the Fenris system, the initial Primaris contingent had been fully incorporated into the chapter's great companies. While they maintained some distinct tactical formations leveraging their unique capabilities, they primarily operated within the traditional pack structure, adopting Fenrisian naming conventions and cultural practices while contributing their enhanced combat abilities to the chapter's arsenal. The reinforced Space Wolves immediately faced a critical test of their integrated capabilities when a massive chaos force emerged from the Great Rift near the Svenger system. Led by a warband of Black Legion veterans, the invaders targeted the system's agri-worlds, seeking to establish a foothold from which to launch deeper raids into Imperial territory. Grimnar deployed 3 great companies to counter this threat, including substantial numbers of newly integrated Primaris Marines. The campaign that followed demonstrated both the strengths and ongoing challenges of this integration. Traditional Space Wolf assault packs achieved breakthrough victories through their characteristic ferocity, while Primaris intercessor squads provided disciplined fire support that prevented Chaos forces from effectively counterattacking. Communication difficulties emerged during complex operations, as traditional Space Wolves relied on pack instincts and unspoken coordination developed over decades of fighting together, while Primaris units expected clear tactical directives and defined operational parameters. These disconnects led to several near disasters, including an incident where Bloodclaws charged a seemingly vulnerable Chaos position without realizing Hellblasters were establishing firing lanes through the same approach. Wolf priests and pack leaders worked to address these issues, developing hybrid command protocols that incorporated both traditional pack signals and more structured communications. By the campaign's conclusion, the chapter had established new operational doctrines that preserved the Space Wolves' characteristic combat style while leveraging the enhanced capabilities of their Primaris brothers. The Svengar campaign also highlighted the changing nature of the chapter's relationship with the returned Primarch Leman. Unlike many Imperial institutions that accepted his authority unquestioningly, the Space Wolves maintained their traditional independence, incorporating his strategic guidance while preserving their operational autonomy. This approach occasionally frustrated Imperial command structures, but proved highly effective in the chaotic conditions of the Dark Imperium, where centralized control often failed to account for rapidly changing local conditions. Leman, for his part, demonstrated unexpected flexibility in his dealings with the Sons of Russ. Having witnessed the catastrophic consequences of rigid adherence to doctrine during the Horus Heresy, the Primarch appeared to value the Space Wolves' alternative perspective, even when it contradicted his preferred methods. Several times during joint operations, he explicitly requested Space Wolf detachments for missions requiring adaptive thinking and unconventional approaches. This pragmatic relationship extended to the chapter's interactions with other Imperial institutions in the wake of the Great Rift. The Space Wolves maintained their traditional skepticism toward the Inquisition and Ecclesiarchy, but necessity forced greater cooperation with these organizations than had been typical in previous centuries. Wolf Lords found themselves coordinating with inquisitorial task forces investigating chaos corruption, while chapter vessels increasingly relied on navigator houses and chartist captains to navigate the treacherous warp conditions of Imperium Nihilus. The nature of warfare itself changed for the Space Wolves in the era Indomitus. Where previous conflicts had clear objectives and identifiable enemies, the battles of the Dark Imperium often blurred these distinctions. Populations tainted by subtle warp influence might appear as victims one moment and turn into threats the next. Planetary defense forces could be infiltrated by chaos cultists, making it impossible to distinguish ally from enemy until it was too late. These conditions placed enormous stress on the chapter's traditional combat doctrine, which emphasized direct confrontation with clearly identified foes. Wolf Lords found themselves dedicating increasing resources to intelligence gathering and threat assessment, roles traditionally considered secondary to direct combat operations. Wolf Scouts gained new prominence within the chapter hierarchy, their ability to infiltrate compromised populations and identify corruption becoming as valuable as battlefield prowess. Rune priests faced particular challenges in this new reality. The increased warp turbulence following the opening of the Great Rift made their abilities both more powerful and more dangerous to wield. Several incidents occurred where even experienced priests lost control of their powers during battle, resulting in friendly casualties and psychic backlash that threatened entire operations. In response, the chapter developed new protective protocols, including the creation of specialized Primaris units trained to contain and neutralize psychic threats, even from within their own ranks. These adaptations, while necessary, raised uncomfortable questions about the chapter's fundamental identity. The Sons of Russ had always defined themselves through their role as humanity's defenders, intervening when conventional Imperial forces proved insufficient against existential threats. In the fragmented reality of the Dark Imperium, with countless human populations facing simultaneous extinction-level dangers, this mission became impossible to fulfill in its traditional form. Logan Grimnar addressed this existential crisis during the Feast of the Founding in the 42nd millennium, the first full gathering of chapter leadership since the formation of the Great Rift. Standing before the assembled Wolf Lords in the Fang's Great Hall, the ancient warrior acknowledged the unprecedented challenges facing the chapter but reaffirmed its core purpose. "We are not the shield of the Imperium," he reportedly told the gathered leaders. "We are the hunters in the dark. When all other lights fail, when hope seems lost, we remain. We track, we kill, we endure. This is what Russ made us for, not for glory or easy victories, but for the longest hunt of all." This redefinition of purpose provided a framework for the chapter's operations in the new reality. rather than attempting to defend territory or maintain permanent control over regions as they had traditionally done. The Space Wolves increasingly focused on targeted elimination of specific high-value threats, demon princes, chaos lords, and other entities whose destruction would have cascading positive effects across multiple systems. The Blackmane hunt exemplified this new approach. Following intelligence from inquisitorial sources about a Thousand Suns sorcerer establishing a foothold near the strategically vital Carrick Warp Gate, Ragnar Blackmane led a strike force comprised of elements from multiple great companies in a pursuit that spanned 7 systems over 3 years. The operation prioritized tracking and elimination of the target over holding territory or engaging supporting forces, with the strike force repeatedly withdrawing from winnable battles to maintain pursuit of their primary quarry. When the sorcerer was finally cornered on the death world of Skalvak, the resulting battle demonstrated the full evolution of space wolf tactics in the era Indomitus. Traditional wolf scouts located and fixed the target's position. Primaris infiltrators established a containment perimeter to prevent escape, and a mixed assault force of Bloodclaws and Inceptors executed the final attack. The operation succeeded with minimal casualties and prevented a ritual that would have collapsed the Carrick Warp Gate, preserving a vital navigation route for Imperial forces throughout the sector. As the era Indomitus progresses, the Space Wolves continue to adapt while maintaining their essential nature. The integration of Primaris Marines has strengthened the chapter physically while introducing new tactical possibilities. Their relationship with Guilliman and broader Imperial authorities remains complex but functional, characterized by mutual respect rather than blind obedience. Most importantly, they have preserved their core identity as hunters of mankind's most dangerous foes, adapting this role to the unprecedented challenges of a galaxy split by the Great Rift. The future of the chapter remains uncertain. The Wolf Time, the prophesied final battle when Leman Russ would return to lead his sons against the ultimate enemy, seems closer than ever in this age of constant warfare and demonic incursion. Many within the chapter believe the opening of the Great Rift heralds the beginning of this long-foretold reckoning, with some wolf priests interpreting increased warp activity near the Eye of Terror as signs of the Primarch's imminent return. Whether these prophecies will be fulfilled remains to be seen. What is certain is that the Sons of Russ stand ready to face whatever challenges emerge from the darkness of the era Indomitus. Their adaptation to the realities of the Dark Imperium demonstrates the fundamental resilience that has allowed them to endure for 10,000 years, while other chapters have fallen to corruption or extinction. As they have since their founding, the Space Wolves continue their eternal hunt, guided by the wisdom of Russ and their unwavering commitment to humanity's protection against the horrors that threaten it from within and without. In the gathering darkness of the 42nd millennium, as ancient enemies return and new threats emerge from the Great Rift, the howl of the Vlka Fenryka still strikes fear into the hearts of mankind's foes. The hunt continues, as it must, until the wolf time comes at last.